The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Wesley W. Simina, President and Head of Government of the Federated States of Micronesia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Temporary President Mr. Libwe, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the people and government of Micronesia, I extend a warm Kamorale. Kamorale back home was coined as a national greeting that combines the diverse languages of all our islands. Kamorale represents the spirit of unity and solidarity that lies at the heart of my country and people. And that same spirit is equally important in the context of multilateralism here at the United Nations. In a world where global challenges require collective action, Kamorale reminds us that through our strength and solutions come from our ability to come together. Just as the 4 states of Micronesia come together under one banner, our international community must come together in order to progress peace, prosperity, and sustainable development we all wish to see as envisioned in the Pact for the Future. After traveling thousands of miles from Micronesia with my delegation, I am honored to participate in this 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I congratulate you, Mr. President, on your election as President of the General Assembly, and I assure you of my delegation's support for your leadership. I also acknowledge our outgoing President of the 78th session for the impactful work he had carried out during his term. I must also pay tribute to our Secretary General, who recently joined us in the Pacific for the Pacific Islands Forum Leaders Meeting. We deeply appreciate your tireless efforts to strengthen our United Nations as a vital instrument for achieving our shared goals. Mr. President, since the time Micronesia became a member of the United Nations in September 1991, we have been grappling with the severe impacts of climate change. I cannot emphasize enough how it is the single greatest threat to our home. Even as I speak today, we are currently in a state of emergency due to the extended drought facing my nation. For us, every degree, every inch of sea level rise, drought, and every delay matters. We continue to call on our global community to step up with stronger and urgent action. Mr. President, I raise an important topic that relates to our island's ability to adapt to and survive the increasing impacts of climate change. Time is running out to prevent average global temperature from surpassing 1.5 degrees. We are already at 1.2, according to the latest science. The 1.5 degrees goal is the safety limit for our small islands. Beyond that lies a danger zone with deadly heat that will cost lives, impact our food and water systems, and will drown many of our low-lying islands. Carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. So while it is critical for the world to cut those emissions, the benefits of those cuts will not be felt until later this century. We need to control temperatures now. We call upon the larger emitters to prioritize reduction of the non-CO2 pollutants, especially methane, fluorinated gases, and black carbon. The IPCC and more recent scientific reports explains that this is the only way. So I urge all of us to take a greater action now. I call on all parties to the Paris Agreement to include ambitious non-CO2 goals and measures in their 2025 round of NDCs. As we take action on non-CO2 pollutants, we also need all countries to come together and agree on a global plan to transition away from fossil fuels in a fair, just, and equitable manner. In this connection, I am announcing that Micronesia endorses the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. We must accelerate all our efforts to tackle the climate crisis. Mr. President, the health of our ocean is deteriorating due to the effects of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. One of the most hard-hitting issues we are confronted with is sea level rise. I am very pleased that the General Assembly is hosting for the first time a high-level meeting on sea level rise this week. Sea level rise poses a significant threat to the livelihoods, well-being, and security of our small island nations, communities, and ecosystems. However, this climate crisis does not jeopardize our statehood or sovereignty, nor does it diminish our rights under international law. Leaders from the Pacific Islands Forums, or PIF, and the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS, have affirmed that our maritime zones, as recognized by the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, will remain valid despite physical changes due to climate change. We emphasize that the statehood and sovereignty of PIF and AOSIS members will endure, along with the associated rights and responsibilities, including the protection of our citizens, regardless of the impacts of sea level rise. Mr. President, the International Seabed Authority is currently negotiating its draft exploitation regulations, and Micronesia is adopting a careful approach on seabed mining. We will consider all relevant factors regarding this matter and will join the Talanoa here being organized this year by the Pacific Islands Forum. Micronesia joins other nations in emphasizing the necessity of comprehensive knowledge, data, and scientific understanding of the marine environment and the impacts of deep-sea mining before any exploitation takes place. We urge the ISA to finalize all relevant regulations, standards, and guidelines for its mining code prior to exploitation. Additionally, it is crucial that all stakeholders, including adjacent coastal states, indigenous peoples, and local communities in the Pacific, are consulted and their perspectives considered before any exploitation occurs. Mr. President, Micronesia is pleased with the adoption of the United Nations PB&J agreement. I was the first leader to sign the PB&J agreement here in New York a year ago, and among the first to deposit our instrument of ratification. Currently, over 90 countries have signed, and we wish that all will sign. I urge others to sign, ratify, so that we can operationalize the PB&J agreement. We look forward to the preparatory commission to begin its important work soon. Mr. President, the international community is set to adopt a legally binding treaty to end plastic pollution, including in the marine environment in Busan, Republic of Korea, later this year. This treaty must address plastic pollution at its source, plastic production, particularly primary plastic polymers derived from fossil fuels. Micronesia's bridge to Busan Declaration, launched earlier this year, calls for international support to regulate plastics production in the treaty. As negotiations near completion, we urge global backing for the declaration to ensure the treaty includes strong measures to curb plastic production and tackle both pollution and climate change. If we do not address the unsustainable production of primary plastic polymers, then the global goal of ending plastic pollution by 2040 and limiting the average temperature rise to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius cannot be achieved. Mr. President, Micronesia plays a vital role in the Pacific Islands Forum 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. As part of the large oceanic countries and territories, we are custodians of nearly 20% of the Earth's surface, placing immense cultural and spiritual value on our ocean and land as a shared heritage. Our leaders' commitments to the 2050 focus on preserving and protecting our oceans, ensuring a sustainable future for our children. Micronesia is dedicated to reducing and preventing the causes and impacts of climate change and sea level rise. With the support of our partners, we are committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. We pledge to safeguard the future of our people by protecting our sovereignty, maritime zones, and resources, especially in the face of climate-induced sea level rise. Mr. President, the health of our people is crucial to Micronesia's nation's building. Non-communicable diseases, NCDs, significantly undermine our nation's well-being. NCDs hinder workforce productivity and contribute to poverty. Unfortunately, the Pacific has some of the highest rates of these diseases, with Micronesia ranking among the top countries. In 2016, NCDs accounted for 75% of all deaths in Micronesia. Recognizing this national health emergency, Micronesia has taken decisive action. Since 1995, we have participated in WHO's Healthy Islands Initiative, focusing on health protection, risk reduction, and promoting healthy lifestyles. We developed a national NCD action plan in 2006, and the Pacific NCD roadmap has guided our efforts since 2014. In 2022, we reaffirm our commitment to securing the well-being of our people through the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. Our fight against NCDs is key to building a healthier, stronger future for Micronesia. However, despite decades of effort under the Healthy Islands Initiative, NCDs continue to pose a serious challenge in Micronesia. The persistence of this disease warrants the need for renewed support and stronger partnerships. There is an opportunity here to reevaluate both the Healthy Islands Initiative and the Pacific NCD roadmap, exploring ways to enhance their effectiveness. By working together, we can confront this crisis more robustly and ensure that we move forward towards a healthier and more resilient future. Mr. President, as we gather today, we are reminded of the importance of global peace and security, particularly in light of the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine between Israel and Palestine. Micronesia reaffirms its unwavering commitment to peace and dialogue. We condemn the invasions of Ukraine and the killing of innocent civilians. We also condemn the attack by Hamas on Israeli citizens on October 7th, and we believe that every nation has the right to defend its people and territory. We urge for the immediate and safe release of hostages and cessation of hostilities. And I urge all parties to work towards a peaceful resolution. It is our profound hope that both Israel and Palestine can resume meaningful negotiations with the goal of establishing two states living side by side in peace and security with clear and recognized borders. We commend the constructive efforts of the United States, Egypt, and Qatar in supporting the peace process, and we remain hopeful that through diplomacy and cooperation, lasting peace can be achieved. Micronesia remains committed that the protection of innocent civilians everywhere is of paramount importance, as peace can only be sustained when the lives and dignity of all people are protected. Mr. President, Micronesia joins Pacific Island nations in advocating for the establishment of a special representative for climate, peace, and security, emphasizing that climate change is a significant global security threat. The UN system, particularly the Security Council, must adapt to address the challenges posed by the climate crisis in a comprehensive and coordinated manner. Currently, the Council struggles to effectively tackle major peace and security issues, highlighting the need for comprehensive reform. This reform should make the Council more effective, inclusive, transparent, and accountable. It must reflect the realities of today rather than those of 1945. It is time for permanent membership of the Security Council to be expanded to include Japan, India, Germany, Brazil, and representation from the African continent. Additionally, it is crucial to amplify the voices of underrepresented regions, such as small island developing states, in a reformed Council. Mr. President, in today's complex global landscape, strengthening the multilateral system for an inclusive, interdisciplinary UN is essential. Support for multi-country offices that represent the UN on the ground must be reinforced to assist vulnerable nations in fully implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Additionally, the coordination role of resident coordinators should be supported and strengthened. For small island developing states, our reliance on stable international assistance for development cannot be overstated. We need sustainable assistance for development we need sustainable financing from donor partners and international financial institutions. It is no surprise that SIDS have led the charge for a more inclusive global financial architecture. The recently adopted Multi-Vulnerability Index, or MVI, is a crucial tool, providing a comprehensive understanding of the unique challenges faced by SIDS. The next step is to implement the MVI in a way that addresses our specific needs. Mr. President, the special case of SIDS in the context of climate change and sustainable development and our particular vulnerability to natural disasters and external shocks must be supported by an increase in climate finance and investment, including new and additional climate finance. We call on developed countries to fulfill their commitments in this regard. Mr. President, gender equality is vital for national building and effective governance. By acceding to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, Micronesia is committed to achieving gender parity. We have also endorsed the Pacific Leaders' Gender Equality Declaration and established a national gender policy. Strengthening gender equality is a priority within my administration, and I have nominated more women to key roles, including my cabinet, to address the imbalance in government. In a historic achievement, 3 women were recently elected to our 14-member Congress, marking a significant milestone for representation. With these steps, Micronesia is moving towards a stronger and more inclusive future. Mr. President, today we stand at a critical crossroads where the future of our planet rests in the hands of our youth. It is not enough to speak of change. We must empower the next generation to lead it. Our young people are innovators, the visionaries, and the problem solvers who will carry the torch of climate action and global justice. But they cannot do it alone. We must invest in their education and well-being, nurture their leadership and character. We must give them the tools to build a resilient, sustainable world. As leaders, we must ensure that our youth are not the inheritors of a dying planet, but are the co-architects of its transformation. In closing, Mr. President, the challenges we face, from climate change to conflict, from the health of our oceans to the well-being of our people, demand urgent and unified action. Let us not be discouraged by the magnitude of the tasks before us, but instead be inspired by the opportunity we have to reshape our world for the better. The spirit of camaraderie teaches us that strength lies in unity, and in that spirit, I call on every nation represented here to act decisively with courage and compassion. Let us work together with resolve and prioritize the protection of our planet, our people, and our future. The time for action is now. Let this assembly be remembered not for words spoken, but for deeds done, for promises kept, and for the lasting legacy we leave for our generations to come. As we were so rightly reminded of at the opening of the Summit of the Future by the youth representative from South Sudan, the future is for the youth to forge, not for us to cling on to. Micronesia is ready to play its part, and I urge all of you to join us in this collective effort so that together we can build a world where peace, prosperity, and sustainability are not just aspirations, but realities for all of us. As enshrined in the preamble of our FSM Constitution, and I quote, "Our ancestors who made their homes on these islands displaced no other people. We who remain wish no other home than this. Having known war, we hope for peace. Having been divided, we wish unity. Having been ruled, we seek freedom. We extend to all nations what we seek from each: peace, friendship, cooperation, and love in our common humanity." I thank you, and I leave you with camaraderie. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President and Head of Government of the Federated States of Micronesia. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Prithvi Raj Singh Rompoon, President of the Republic of Mauritius. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Your Excellency, Mr. Philemon Yang, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, good afternoon. Mr. President, I also warmly congratulate you. Mauritius is proud to see a son of Africa assume the high office of President of the 79th session of the General Assembly. I assure you of the full support of Mauritius. We remain committed to the universal values and noble aspirations of the United Nations. Our appreciation also goes to His Excellency Denis Francis, who throughout the 78th session championed solidarity and unity during challenging times. Secretary General Antonio Guterres also deserves our special recognition for his inspiring and commendable initiatives in furthering the objectives of our organization. Mr. President, the theme being addressed in this August Assembly is in consonance and resonates deeply with the very essence of our organization. The UN emerged out of the ashes of war and untold sufferings. We have a moral obligation to ensure that the ultimate sacrifice of millions of women and men was not in vain. Our organization has since embodied the universal values of peace, justice, equity, respect for the rule of law, and human dignity. It is appalling that we are lately witnessing an erosion of these same values. Unfortunately, might is taking over and impunity still prevails. The dignity of the weakest is being shamelessly flouted on a scale never seen before. Behind protracted conflicts around the world lies inestimable human costs. Mr. President, the devastation and sufferings in Gaza are heart-wrenching. Thousands of innocent lives have been lost. We urge the international community to find a solution for a de-escalation in the region, for a just and lasting peace. And we are convinced that the two-state solution based on relevant UN resolutions and international law will uphold human dignity and equality for all. We welcome the advisory opinion on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. There is an urgent need for a renewed commitment to diplomacy and constructive dialogue, as in many parts of the world, conflicts, instability, and challenges to security are still unabated. Mr. President, the world has witnessed an unprecedented technological revolution in a short span of time. For humanity to benefit from its transformative power, AI governance should be anchored in international law. Current unsustainable consumption and production trends are exacerbating injustices and inequalities. We are at a watershed moment. Mauritius welcomes the adoption of the Pact for the Future, which is a renewed testimony to our collective resolve for the betterment of our world. We also need to ensure that the overall architecture of our global institutions reflects today's realities. Mauritius believes that inclusivity is a necessity and not a choice. Small states and large alike deserve a voice. Africa and SIDS have their rightful place in a reformed Security Council. Multilateral and international financial institutions should be more representative and also responsive to the needs of all countries. This is the only way to pave for a more equitable and resilient world where human dignity is upheld. Mr. President, Mauritius believes that human dignity is universal, unalienable, and unconditional. This conviction has always guided our actions. Our multicultural society thrives on fairness, equity, and human dignity. Through unity in diversity, we have strengthened our unique and tolerant society. We have spared no effort in advancing the economic, social, and cultural rights of our citizens. Our commitment to free and fair elections, good governance, and putting people at the center of development remains resolute. We are investing heavily in free healthcare, infrastructural development, free education for pre-primary school to tertiary level, amongst others. We are promoting decent work for all. The empowerment of women and youth remains at the heart of the government actions. These inclusive approaches and supportive policies have contributed to the strengthening of our social fabric. Mr. President, the climate emergency is one of the most pressing global threats of our time. Greenhouse emissions from human activities have irrefutably contributed to global warming, sea level rise, and coastal erosion. It is most unfortunate that SIDS, like Mauritius, which have contributed to the least in global emission, are being the most affected. A multilateral approach to confront these threats is an absolute necessity. We must achieve the highest possible ambition while ensuring equity, common and differentiated responsibilities. Our actions need to be guided by the latest scientific insights and informed by the outcomes of the global stocktake agreed upon at COP28, including its roadmap for keeping 1.5 centigrade within reach. This target is a lifeline for all of us, especially SIDS. Therefore, an agreement on a fair and ambitious new collective quantified goal on climate is imperative. As temperatures rise, the very foundation of life for oceanic states are endangered. We welcome the recent advisory opinion of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea on climate change. It stands as a juridical lighthouse compelling all states to chart a new course guided by science and the moral imperative of intergenerational equity. In the fight against climate change, our resolve should be translated into concrete and time-bound actions. One which is commensurate with the urgency and scale of the climate crisis. Mr. President, Mauritius has ratified the BBNG treaty, underscoring our commitment to protecting our ocean resources and ensuring sustainable marine governance. We are fully committed to the implementation of the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, adopted earlier this year. The openness of SIDS economies makes us more vulnerable to external shocks. SIDS should be able to access global value chains for green jobs. We welcome innovative approaches and the use of the MVI for enhancing the effectiveness of access to concessional finance. Mr. President, Mauritius has been and remains fully committed to the advancement of our African continent. Africa is a land of untapped opportunities. However, our continent is faced with several challenges, preventing it from realizing its full potential. Our Agenda 2063, including the African Continental Free Trade Area, has the ability to propel Africa. Our continent also resonates with cultural richnesses and stands united in purpose. Africa, with its youth dividend, stands ready to contribute to global solutions in shaping a more equitable and sustainable world for a better tomorrow. We call upon the international community to join in Africa's transformative journey. Mr. President, Mauritius and the United Kingdom are still pursuing negotiations on the exercise of sovereignty over the Chagos Archipelago, following the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of 25th February 2019. Several rounds of talks have taken place so far, and Mauritius continues to be engaged in these talks in good faith. We urge the United Kingdom to conclude expeditiously an agreement that would allow for the completion of the decolonization of Mauritius and the implementation of a resettlement program for the former inhabitants of the Chagos Archipelago in accordance with Mauritian laws. Such an agreement would also protect and preserve vital security interests on Diego Garcia. We also appeal to France to resolve the dispute over Tromelin, which forms an integral part of the territory of Mauritius, in the spirit of friendship that characterizes the relationship between our two countries. Before concluding, I wish to emphasize that the United Nations remains the ideal platform in bringing us together to address global challenges for a peaceful and more equitable world. We need also to recognize the contribution of the UN, its agencies, and dedicated personnel. Mr. President, we are convinced that the Pact for the Future will serve as the guiding star, leading us to an improved world for tomorrow's generations. I am confident that, together, we can forge a better, brighter, and more equitable world. One where no one is left behind, where human dignity and human rights prevail, where collective good for mankind remains at the core for lasting peace and prosperity. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Mauritius. The Assembly will continue the consideration of Agenda Item 8, entitled General Debate. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Charles Michel, President of the European Council of the European Union. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée générale, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, lorsqu'on pénètre dans ce bâtiment, le regard est attiré par une lumière bleutée. C'est le vitrail de la paix. Au cœur des Nations Unies, ce vitrail de la paix est dédié à ceux qui servent les Nations Unies. Ce vitrail a été créé par Marc Chagall, un juif russe qui a vécu la majeure partie de sa vie en exil, traversant 2 guerres mondiales. Pour garantir la paix et la sécurité reconquises en 1945, les promesses de liberté et de solidarité ont été gravées dans la Charte des
promises
Nations
of
Unies.
freedom and solidarity were
Ceci
engraved in the
est le
United Nations
10e
Charter.
discours consécutif que j'ai
This is
l'honneur
the
de
10th
prononcer à cette
consecutive
tribune.
time I
En
had the honor
2015,
of delivering a statement
Je
from
vais
this rostrum.
énumérer les défis
In
de notre
2015,
génération,
I listed the
conflits,
challenges of
pauvreté,
our
climat,
generation,
migration, et
conflict,
bien entendu
poverty,
aucun
the climate and
de ces défis
migration.
n'a disparu.
None
Mais
of
nous
these
pensions à l'époque, il y a 10
challenges
ans,
have been
disposer
solved.
d'un cadre solide, robuste,
And yet at the
l'ordre
time, we
multilatéral
thought that we
qui
had
nous permettrait
a
d'y
robust
travailler
framework, the
ensemble.
multilateral order,
Nous sommes
which
10
would
ans
allow
plus
us to
tard,
work together to tackle
et
these
ce
challenges.
cadre est
A
en train de
decade
se
has gone
fissurer
by,
sous nos yeux.
and
Usage
this
de la force,
framework is
actes
shattering before our
unilatéraux se
very eyes.
multiplient
The use of
et nous
force,
assistons,
growing numbers
parfois
of
c'est vrai,
unilateral acts,
avec un sentiment
and what we're
d'impuissance,
witnessing
à
often
3 conflits majeurs
without any hope
qui forment un cocktail
is
explosif.
3 major conflicts
Ukraine,
which together
Un membre
are brewed
permanent du
into an
Conseil de
explosive
sécurité
cocktail.
a
In
lancé une
Ukraine,
guerre
a permanent
illégale et non
member of the Security
provoquée.
Council
C'est
has
une
launched an
tentative
illegal,
flagrante
unprovoked war.
d'imposer la loi de la force
It is a
plutôt que
flagrant
la force de la loi.
attempt to
Cette guerre, par
impose
conséquent,
the law
n'est pas
using
seulement
force
une menace
instead of
directe
drawing on the
contre
force
le
of the
peuple
law.
ukrainien.
This war is a
C'est une
direct
menace
threat
contre
to
chacun d'entre nous.
the people of
L'Union
Ukraine
européenne
and
soutient
to each and every one
et
of us.
soutiendra
The
l'Ukraine
European Union
aussi longtemps
supports
que
Ukraine
nécessaire,
and will continue to support
fidèle
Ukraine
à
for
la
as long
promesse
as
de
is
liberté
necessary.
et solidarité. Nous réaffirmons
We will
notre
live up to our
engagement
promise
pour une
of
paix globale,
freedom and
juste et
solidarity,
durable, qui
recommitting
doit être
ourselves
fondée
to
sur les
a
principes de la Charte des
comprehensive,
Nations Unies.
just and lasting peace enshrined in the
Liberté,
UN
solidarité,
Charter.
c'est en vertu de ces mêmes principes que nous condamnons les
Freedom
attaques
and
terroristes
solidarity.
abjectes
Drawing on these
portées par
very
le Hamas.
principles,
Et
we'd
nous
like to condemn
exigeons
the
la
terrorist
libération de tous les
attacks,
otages,
vile
sans
terrorist
condition.
attacks committed by Hamas. We
Israël
call for
a le droit de se
the
défendre
release
dans le
of
respect
all
du
hostages
droit
and
international
unconditionally so.
et du principe de
Israel has the right to
proportionnalité.
defend itself.
Nous voulons un
With due
cessez-le-feu
respect for
immédiat,
international law
conformément
and the
à
principle of
l'ordonnance
proportionality,
de la Cour
we want an
internationale de
immediate
justice.
ceasefire in keeping
Chaque
with the advisory
vie
opinion
civile
of the
compte,
ICJ.
et nous condamnons toutes les
The life
attaques
of every civilian
indiscriminées
counts,
qui frappent
and
les
we condemn
populations
all
civiles.
indiscriminate attacks
L'Union
targeting
européenne
civilian
agit
populations.
et veut agir
The EU
davantage pour une paix durable
Is taking action
dans
and
le
wants to
cadre
do
d'une
more
solution
to
avec
achieve
2
lasting
États.
peace within the framework
L'escalade
of
sans
a
fin doit
two-state
cesser,
solution.
et je le
The
dis,
endless
entraîner le
escalation
Liban
must
dans cette
end.
spirale est
Let me tell
absolument
you, drawing
irresponsable.
Lebanon into
Ces
this
appels,
spiral is
y compris
irresponsible,
envers le
absolutely
gouvernement d'Israël,
irresponsible.
ont été vains jusqu'ici,
These
et
calls,
cela ne peut
including
pas
calls
durer.
addressed to the government of
Nous
Israel,
soutenons
have to date borne no
l'existence
fruit. This
d'un
cannot
État
go on.
d'Israël démocratique
We want
fort,
a
vivant
democratic,
en
a
paix et en
strong state of
sécurité,
Israel,
aux
living in
côtés
peace
du
and
peuple
security,
palestinien,
side by side with
qui
the
doit
Palestinian
disposer
people.
de son propre
Palestinian
État,
people, which should have their
viable et
own
stable.
stable and
Le
viable
peuple
state.
palestinien
The
mérite
Palestinian
le
people
respect et la dignité.
deserve respect and
Je le
dignity.
dis au gouvernement d'Israël, visez la sécurité. En
say
négligeant
this
la
to the
paix
government
est un leurre,
of
cela ne
Israel.
fonctionne pas,
Trying to achieve
parce que la
security
paix
without
est la meilleure
peace
garantie de
is
sécurité.
impossible.
Un monde
Without peace,
alimenté
there
par la
cannot
vengeance
be lasting
et les
security.
châtiments collectifs
A
est un monde
world
moins
that,
sûr. Le peuple palestinien a
is
droit à son
driven
État
by
et
revenge
la
is
négation
a
de
world
ce
that
droit
is less
nourrira
safe. The
indéfiniment des
Palestinian
menaces
people
de
have the right to
sécurité
their
sur
own
les
state.
Israéliens et sur celle des Juifs partout dans le monde.
This
La
will
négation des droits
continue
des
to result
Palestiniens
in Israeli
rend le monde
security
plus dangereux
and
et
security of
mine
all Jews
le système
being undermined
multilatéral
unless such a state is
qui ne peut
established.
pas
This will
tolérer
result
le
in
deux poids, deux mesures.
polarization and
Chers
the undermining of
collègues,
the international system, which
La guerre
cannot
civile au Soudan
be
fait
underpinned
rage,
by double
violence,
standards.
brutalité,
Ladies and
viol,
gentlemen,
et comme
the
toujours,
wars
ce
in the
sont
Middle East and
les
in
femmes
Ukraine
qui paient le prix fort.
are resulting in
Une gigantesque
terrible consequences, and
catastrophe
women are paying
humanitaire, 20 000
the
morts, des millions de
worst
personnes
price
déplacées
for
en
this,
situation
including in the civil
d'urgence,
war of
et c'est
Sudan.
toute la corne de
Over
l'Afrique
20,000 people have
qui menace de
died, 20
basculer
million
dans le
people
chaos.
are facing an emergency,
Or,
8 million have
Je
been
pose la question,
displaced.
que sont
Across the
ces
Horn
deux
of
généraux
Africa,
en
the
guerre sans
situation
leur soutien
is turning into
extérieur?
chaos.
Les livraisons d'armes doivent cesser. Nous
We must put
pouvons
an end
stopper ce
to
conflit si
external
nous le voulons.
actors feeding these
Alors
wars.
c'est
We must put an
le
end
moment
to
d'agir
arms
et
supplies.
de mettre en
It
œuvre
is time to
des
take
processus de
action and
réconciliation
to implement
et de paix qui
peace and
s'imposent.
reconciliation processes.
Mesdames et messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen,
la vie d'un enfant
the life
tué
of a child
dans une école bombardée est précieuse
in a school
en
that
Ukraine,
was bombed
à Gaza
is
et partout dans le
valuable.
monde.
In Ukraine, in
La
Gaza,
dignité bafouée
everywhere.
d'une femme violée
The dignity
est sacrée
of
en
a
temps de
woman
guerre comme en temps de paix,
been raped,
au Soudan, en Ukraine,
her
partout dans le
besmirched
monde.
dignity is sacred
Privée de
in times
nourriture,
of of war and
Une
peace in Sudan
population
and Ukraine
entière
elsewhere.
est un crime de guerre.
Depriving
En Ukraine,
an
à
entire
Gaza,
people of food
au
is a
Soudan
crime
ou
of war
ailleurs.
in Ukraine,
Un
in
crime
Gaza, in Sudan,
est un
and
crime,
elsewhere.
quel que soit
Crime is a
l'auteur
crime,
et
regardless
quel que soit le
of
lieu.
who the perpetrators are
Et notre
or where the
indignation,
crime is committed.
pour être sincère, doit être
and
universelle.
our indignation
L'Union
can
européenne
only be
défend
genuine if it is
avec la même
universal.
vigueur le droit international
The European
humanitaire
Union
partout
defends
et toujours. Nous condamnons
international
les
law
actes de
equally
déstabilisation,
across the
quels qu'en soient
board,
les auteurs.
everywhere. We
Je
condemn
pense
all
à
acts
l'Iran,
geared towards
qui, au
destabilization,
travers de
regardless
proxy,
of who the perpetrators
soutient
are.
des
Here
initiatives
I'm
qui
referring
ravagent et
to
fragilisent le
Iran,
Moyen-Orient.
which is using
Je pense
proxies
aussi
to
au
feed
soutien militaire de
and
l'Iran à
conflicts
la
in the
guerre
Middle
menée
East.
par la Russie contre l'Ukraine.
It's
Et,
thanks
mesdames et
to
messieurs,
Iran's military
un
support
constat
and
saute aux yeux.
Russia's war
Iran
in
comme
Ukraine that
Russie
this is happening.
pratiquent
We
les
must take
mêmes
stock of the
recettes.
situation.
Menaces
Iran and
nucléaires,
Russia are using the
ambitions
very same
impérialistes
playbook.
teintées de
The nuclear
nostalgie
threat,
et soutien
imperialist
à des groupes
ambitions,
terroristes sans foi
support
ni loi
for
pour
terrorist
déstabiliser
groups,
le
godless and
voisinage
lawless
et au-delà.
terrorist groups, and all of this
Excellences,
is destabilizing neighboring
Mesdames et
countries
messieurs,
and the rest
la
of the world.
création
Excellencies,
des
ladies and
Nations Unies
gentlemen,
et
the
du
establishment
système
of the United
international
Nations
fondé
and the
sur des
international
règles
system
fut
underpinned by
une avancée
rules
remarquable.
was a remarkable step
Revenir en
forward.
arrière, c'est revenir à la guerre. Et plus
Going
que jamais
backwards
depuis
means
1945,
going back to
le
a time
monde
of
est
war.
bousculé par un cocktail
More than ever since
explosif de chocs
1945,
qui
our
s'additionnent et
world has
s'accélèrent.
been hard hit by an explosive
La Troisième
conflict,
Guerre mondiale
an
est
explosive
possible
cocktail of shocks.
et il est urgent de retrouver
They're
nos
piling
esprits.
up, they're
Cela
speeding
exige
up.
de la coopération,
We must get our
cela
bearings.
exige
This
du
requires
courage, les
cooperation
règles
and
communes doivent
courage.
être
We
respectées
need
et pour
common
cela,
laws which are
le
respected
Conseil
by
de
all.
sécurité doit se
To this
libérer
end, the
du
Security
joug
Council
paralysant que
must
devient
throw
le
off
droit
the
de
yoke
veto dans sa forme
of
actuelle.
the
Ce
veto
Conseil n'est
which
pas
paralyzes it.
représentatif, il
The
est peu
Security Council
légitime,
isn't
il est
representative
inopérant.
nor
Le Conseil de
legitimate, it's
sécurité
ineffective.
est
The
de plus en
Security
plus
Council
un
is
mort vivant.
increasingly
En
stillborn,
juin 1945,
like a zombie.
lors de l'adoption de la Charte des Nations Unies, le président
In June
Truman avait déclaré que
1945,
cette charte serait élargie,
when the UN Charter
améliorée
was
au fil du
adopted,
temps.
President Truman said that
L'évolution
this
des
charter will be
conditions,
expanded
disait-il,
and improved over
nécessitera des
time.
ajustements. Les décennies ont passé,
It will require
le monde
adjustments.
a changé, les
Decades
ajustements
have
n'ont
gone
pas
by.
eu lieu et pourtant,
No
il faut
readjustments were made.
réformer le Conseil
And
de
yet we must
sécurité, le
reform the
rendre
Security
plus
Council.
inclusif.
It must become
L'Afrique,
more
et
inclusive.
selon moi, l'Amérique latine
Africa
notamment,
and,
doivent
the way I
disposer
see
de
it,
sièges permanents
Latin America
et les
should
organisations
have permanent
régionales
seats.
doivent être davantage
Furthermore,
intégrées
regional
au processus de
organisations
décision des Nations
must be
Unies, y compris,
incorporated
je le
further
propose,
into
en
UN
donnant une voix
decision-making.
consultative systématique
Furthermore, they should
à
have
ces organisations
an
régionales
advisory
au sein
role
du
to
Conseil de
play
sécurité.
in the Security Council,
Mesdames
regional
et messieurs,
organizations, that is.
Il n'y a pas de liberté
Ladies
quand
and
les
gentlemen,
sécheresses dévastent nos
there
cultures.
cannot
Il n'y a pas
be
de
any
liberté
freedom
quand des
when
inondations
drought
ravagent nos maisons, quand des
eats away
ouragans
crops.
détruisent nos foyers.
We cannot
Il n'y a pas de
have
liberté
freedom when
quand
there are
quand nos enfants n'ont pas
terrible
accès aux
hurricanes
vaccins,
tearing
aux
down
médicaments,
houses,
n'ont pas accès à
when
l'école.
there are pandemics and
Réchauffement
some do not
climatique,
have access to
épandémie,
medicines or
nous ouvre
vaccines.
les yeux sur l'exigence de solidarité.
We must open our
Et ce n'est
eyes
pas simplement une
and
question
live up to the
morale,
solidarity
de
that's
dignité,
required
de
of us.
générosité.
It's not just about
C'est
dignity,
aussi l'intérêt des
morals,
pays développés
or
de
solidarity.
soutenir
It's in
les
the interest
transitions
of developed
climatiques et
countries
le
to
développement.
support the green
Les aider,
transition
ces pays
as
en
well as
développement, à
development,
renforcer les
helping
systèmes de
developing
santé.
countries
C'est dans cet
to
esprit
buttress their health
le Dr Tedros,
systems.
nous avons
And it is
lancé
in that spirit
l'idée d'un
that Dr.
traité
Tedros
international sur les pandémies.
put forth the
Les
idea of an
négociations
international
ont bien
treaty on
avancé,
pandemics.
mais il est
We've
maintenant
made a
temps de
great deal of
conclure.
headway
Le Mpox est un nouveau
on
signal
these
d'alarme qui nous
negotiations,
ouvre les yeux.
but it's now
Et il n'est pas
time
acceptable
to
que des lobbies ou
finalize
des
the agreement.
égoïsmes barrent le chemin à un
Mpox has set
partage
alarm bells
équitable
off
des
once
technologies
again.
vaccinales et des médicaments.
However, it's unacceptable
Mesdames et
for
messieurs,
lobbies and
il n'y a
egotistical
pas non
behavior
plus de
to
liberté
block
dans un monde
the road to
où
sharing
chaque
of vaccines
individu
and vaccine
est
technologies.
réduit à ses
Distinguished
données
colleagues,
personnelles,
there
à
cannot
une cible
be freedom in a world when each
commerciale ou à
individual
une cible
can
à
be
surveiller,
boiled down to his or
voire à
her
manipuler.
data,
La révolution numérique
to a
et
commercial
son produit
target
phare,
that
l'intelligence
can be
artificielle,
surveilled
est bien sûr un
and
moteur
manipulated.
extraordinaire
The
de
digital
progrès. C'est un
resolution
nouveau
is
carburant
of
pour la
course
prospérité, à
a driver, an
condition
extraordinary
de
driver of
servir
progress,
l'humanité,
specifically
à condition de servir
artificial
la
intelligence.
liberté et les
It's a
droits
new
humains.
driver of prosperity.
Je pense
However,
qu'il est
it
essentiel de ne
must
pas
be harnessed
commettre
for the benefit of
l'erreur que
humanity
l'on a
and
déjà
freedom.
commise avec les
We
ressources
shouldn't commit
naturelles
the error
en
unless we've
abusant
already
tellement
committed
que nous avons mis
of,
notre planète à l'épreuve. Les données
misusing
et l'intelligence
natural
artificielle sont des instruments de
resources
pouvoir,
and misusing
peut-être même
personal data
d'asservissement
like we did with
économique et
natural
politique.
resources.
Ils
Data and
deviennent
artificial
des armes de
intelligence
guerre.
are instruments
Nous
of
devons donc
power. They are
encadrer ces progrès
instruments
à
of
l'échelle globale et
subjugation and
soutenons
economic and
les
political
efforts du secrétaire
domination.
général des Nations
They can
Unies
become
pour y travailler
weapons
dans
of
le
war.
cadre
We
de
must
cette enceinte.
create a
La
framework
compétition
that we
technologique
can move
est
ahead at a
saine parce
global
qu'elle
level.
favorise le progrès. Elle doit aussi
Technological
se
competition
dérouler
is healthy,
dans un
it promotes
cadre commun
progress, but it
avec
must
des
be
règles du jeu équitables. Et c'est
something
pour
that
cela
occurs within
que l'Union
a
européenne
framework which we
est
all
engagée dans
agree
un
to.
dialogue
Rules of the
global
game and fair
au sein du
competition. We need a
G7, bien
global
sûr,
dialogue
mais également avec
within
le
the
reste du
G7,
monde,
but also
Afrique,
together with the rest of the
Amérique
world.
latine,
Africa,
Asie.
Latin
Nous
America,
dialoguons,
Asia.
y compris
We
avec
are
ceux
going to
dont nous combattons les idées et
work with
parfois
them.
même les
We're
comportements.
also going to work
La
with
Chine,
those whose
est un
ideas
acteur
and sometimes
indispensable
whose behaviors
pour relever les
we do
grands
not agree
défis
with.
mondiaux et
China
l'Union européenne entend
is a key partner to
rééquilibrer
help
ses
us
relations
tackle
actuelles avec la
global
Chine
challenges,
en
which I
réduisant les
mentioned
risques,
earlier,
en
to
diversifiant
reduce risks,
nos chaînes d'approvisionnement,
to
car les
diversify
dépendances
our
excessives,
supply
nous le savons,
chains.
ouvrent la
Because,
voie à
as we
des
know, excessive
vulnérabilités
dependence
et
on a
donc à
given
des conflits.
supplier gives
Nous
rise
demandons
to
aussi à la Chine
vulnerability and thus
de ne pas
conflict.
soutenir la Russie, ni
We should also
directement
ask
ni
China to
indirectement,
not
dans sa
support
guerre
China,
illégale contre
to not
l'Ukraine,
support Russia,
mais
neither
plutôt
directly
d'user
nor
de
indirectly,
son
in
influence
its legal war
afin de
against
faire
Ukraine.
respecter la
Instead,
Charte des
China
Nations
should
Unies.
use its influence to ensure
Mesdames et
respect for the
messieurs,
United Nations Charter.
l'architecture
Ladies
financière
and gentlemen,
internationale
The international financial
doit
architecture
réduire les
should
inégalités
help us to
et pas les
reduce
amplifier.
inequality, not
Quand un
to
paysan kényan n'a
exacerbate it.
pas accès à un
When a
microcrédit
Kenyan
à des taux
farmer cannot
abordables,
access
ce n'est pas un détail,
microloans
c'est
at
un enjeu de
acceptable
développement
rates.
global. Parce que le
It's
développement
not just something
mondial est
unfortunate,
sous-financé,
it's a
l'écart
challenge to the
entre les
entire
besoins
global development
en investissement et les
order.
ressources financières
Because
disponibles
without
est
lasting
gigantesque
and equitable
et le
development, we
système de
cannot
Bretton
have
Woods
global
doit
stability and
profondément
security.
changer. La
We must
puissance
change
de
the
feu
system.
financière doit être multipliée à
Financial
la hauteur des
firepower
besoins des
must be
populations pour
multiplied
faire
for the
reculer la menace
benefit of our
climatique
people,
et pour faire avancer la
to
prospérité.
ensure that we can address the
Les
climate
pays
threat
créditeurs
and
doivent être plus
achieve
courageux
prosperity.
pour restructurer les
The most
dettes et
courageous
réallouer
donors
les droits de
should
tirage
restructure
spéciaux. La
debt and
solidarité,
allocate
ce
additional
n'est pas seulement
special
le
drawing
transfert de moyens
rights.
financiers ou technologiques,
It's not
ce
just
sont
about
aussi
the transfer
des
of
efforts de
financial or
gouvernance,
technological means.
améliorer l'environnement
Solidarity
des
also
affaires,
requires us to
renforcer la
reform
sécurité
governance, to
juridique,
improve business climate,
mobiliser les
strengthen
ressources propres
legal
des pays en
certainty,
développement, comme
combat
l'a dit
corruption and
avec
mobilize
franchise
resources
Mo
within
Ibrahim.
developing countries
Si l'aide
as well.
économique
As Mo
et
Ibrahim
l'assistance à
said
l'Afrique
very
sont
frankly,
louables, nous devons changer la façon, dit-il,
while
dont les pays
economic
sont gérés.
aid and relief efforts
Et je
for
le précise,
Africa
cela vaut
are
aussi
wonderful
pour les pays
and commendable acts
développés.
of solidarity, we also
Mesdames
need
et
to change the
messieurs,
way our
je souhaite
countries are run.
conclure ce 10e
Ladies and
discours à
gentlemen,
cette
by way of
tribune
conclusion,
par quelques
I'd like
convictions
to
personnelles.
end this 10th and last speech
La
from
première
this rostrum
conviction,
with a few
Les
personal
deux poids, deux mesures,
remarks. My first
c'est le
point.
poison contemporain
Double
des
standards
relations internationales.
are a modern
Lorsque nous
day
défendons
poison in international
la
relations.
dignité humaine,
When we
la
defend
souveraineté
human
territoriale,
dignity, territorial
les
sovereignty,
élections honnêtes, libres et transparentes,
honest,
nous
free
devons
and transparent
les
elections,
défendre et les protéger
we should
partout et
defend and
toujours.
protect them
Et
across the
chacun,
board
probablement,
under
avec
all
humilité,
circumstances.
doit se regarder dans le miroir. Nous sommes
And each
tous
and one of us
les
must
gardiens de nos
humbly look in the
histoires, de
mirror.
nos cultures, de nos traditions.
We have all
Et
inherited
probablement
our own
aussi
cultures, our own
de nos
histories,
erreurs
traditions,
respectives.
and probably
Chacun
our
doit
various
tirer ses leçons
errors.
avec
Everyone
modestie
must draw
pour
conclusions
s'efforcer de devenir meilleur.
humbly. We must do our
L'Europe
best
peut-être
to be
parfois est maladroite,
better.
mais toujours agit
Europe
sincèrement
often
et de bonne
acts
foi pour que la
awkwardly, but
liberté
it
et
does
les
so
droits humains soient
genuinely in
respectés.
good faith to ensure that human rights and
Deuxième
freedoms
conviction.
are protected across the board.
Nous devons
This brings me to my second point.
résolument rejeter
We must
la confrontation bipolaire
steadfastly
et agir avec force
reject
pour
bipolar
un monde
confrontation and
multipolaire
act
dans un cadre
forcefully
multilatéral
to build a
où
multipolar
chaque
world
pays
in a
ou
multilateral
groupe de
framework.
pays choisit
in
sa voie
which
pour prospérer
every country or group
et
of
où
countries
tous
can choose its own
coopèrent
path towards
en suivant
prosperity
des
and
règles
work hand in
décidées
hand while
ensemble.
abiding by rules
Et
we've agreed
résistons.
to all of us.
Résistons aux pressions
We
pour
must
choisir un
resist,
camp contre
resist
l'autre
to
dans la
the pressure
confrontation
to pit
bipolaire qui ne peut que
one
mener au
camp,
pire.
one group of countries
Enfin,
against another,
ma
to
troisième
choose
conviction,
sides,
Je crois
because
profondément à la
bipolar
coopération
confrontation
entre les
is
organisations
not a good solution.
régionales
Third,
et le rapport
I deeply
substantiel
believe
pour les
in
Nations
regional
Unies.
organizations.
L'Union
And,
européenne
what they can
s'est
bring
investie ces
to
5 dernières
the
années
United
dans le
Nations.
développement de
Over the
partenariats
last 5
avec
years,
l'Union
the EU has
africaine,
built
les
partnerships
pays
with the
d'Amérique
African Union,
latine et des
Latin
Caraïbes
American
dans le cadre du
countries,
CELAC, avec l'ASEAN, avec le Conseil de
Caribbean
coopération des
countries,
pays du Golfe,
in
avec les
CELAC,
pays d'Asie centrale.
ASEAN, the
Ces
Gulf
réseaux de
Cooperation
coopération
Council, Central
sont
Asian
un tissu
countries. These
stabilisateur et
cooperation
porteur de progrès.
networks help to
L'Union européenne peut être
weave
plus
the fabric
forte,
of
plus
stabilization
autonome,
and achieve
pour renforcer
progress.
sa capacité
Our EU
à interagir
must become
et
stronger and more
travailler pour la
autonomous
paix,
so as
la
to bolster its
liberté
capacity,
et la
capacity
solidarité.
to work
Et je
together
le sais,
with other
beaucoup dans le
organizations in
monde
the name of peace,
attendent une voix
freedom and
forte
solidarity.
et indépendante de l'Union européenne.
You'll be hearing the EU's voice
Excellences,
on the world
mesdames et messieurs,
stage, loud and
deux
independent.
guerres
Excellencies,
mondiales,
ladies and gentlemen,
l'Holocauste,
two world
la
wars,
négation
the
absolue
Holocaust,
de l'humanité. Ce continent
humiliation for
européen
humanity.
porte
the
des
European
cicatrices
continent
indélébiles
bears the
et
scars
donc, nous le pensons, une responsabilité
of
particulière
its past,
dans la défense
and
de la
therefore we have
liberté,
a special
de la
responsibility to defend
solidarité
freedom,
et de la
solidarity,
dignité humaine
and
universelle.
universal
Le
human
projet
dignity.
européen est celui de la
The European
réconciliation.
project is geared
La
towards
coopération.
reconciliation
Et puis,
cooperation.
de plus en plus, celui de l'amitié
and
et de la
increasingly
fraternité.
friendship and
Ce projet européen, je le crois, est donc
fraternity.
une inspiration
The
et
European
un
project
espoir.
should be a source of
L'optimisme
inspiration, of
est
hope
un
and
devoir.
optimism.
Nous pouvons,
Optimism is a
une
duty, in
fois
fact.
encore,
We
changer
can,
le cours de l'histoire,
once again,
à condition de
change
nous
the course
ressaisir.
of history,
Il n'y a pas de
provided
fatalité.
that
Le futur n'est
we
pas
band
encore écrit.
together.
Plus
The
de
future
paix
has
et de
not been
sécurité,
written.
c'est
It is not a
possible.
given.
Plus de liberté,
We can
plus de
achieve greater
solidarité,
peace,
c'est possible.
greater freedom,
La paix
greater
requiert des
solidarity.
efforts. Nous le
Peace
savons, elle n'est jamais
requires
donnée.
a lot of effort.
La paix est
We know that.
délicate,
We've given
la
those
paix
efforts. And
est
peace is very
fragile,
fragile.
difficile à réparer tant elle se
It
brise.
breaks
Mais
down
la paix est
sometimes,
magnifique,
but we can piece it together,
lumineuse
even though it's
et
difficult.
porteuse de
Peace
rêves
is
et
wonderful. It's
d'espoir,
luminous.
comme
It carries in it
le
hope,
vitrail bleu
as
pour la paix de
does
Marc Chagall.
the blue peace
Soyons
window
sans
crafted by Marc
relâche
Chagall.
les artisans de la
Let's
paix.
work
Vous pouvez
tirelessly
compter sur
to
l'Union
build
européenne.
peace.
Je vous
You can
remercie.
count on the European Union. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the European Council of the European Union. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Tiomiko Meliad Konye, Vice President of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Monsieur le Président de la 79e
President of
session
the
de l'Assemblée
79th
générale des
session
Nations
of the
Unies,
United Nations General Assembly,
Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement,
heads of state and government,
Monsieur le Secrétaire général des Nations Unies,
United
Mesdames et
Nations
Messieurs,
Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen,
je voudrais, au nom de Son Excellence
on behalf
Monsieur
of His
Alassane Ouattara,
Excellency
Président de
Mr.
la
Alassane
République de
Ouattara,
Côte
President
d'Ivoire,
of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire,
vous
I
adresser
wish
mes
to
chaleureuses
express
félicitations
my
pour la
warm
qualité et la
congratulations
profondeur des
on the
débats de cette
quality
session
and depth of the debates
et
during
pour
this
le
session,
remarquable succès
and
du sommet de
on the
l'avenir.
remarkable success that was the
Notre
site of
débat
the future.
général se tient dans un
Our general
contexte mondial
debate is being
préoccupant.
held against
Sur le plan
a worrisome
sécuritaire,
global backdrop
économique et
on
politique,
the security, economic and
appelant nos
political
nations
levels,
à un sursaut collectif.
calling on our nations to make a
C'est dans
collective
cette
leap forward.
perspective que mon pays se
With this
félicite
in
du choix
mind, my
pertinent
country
du thème de la
welcomes
présente session,
the very
qui
relevant
invite nos
choice of
États à
a theme
regarder
for this
dans la même
session,
direction
which invites our states
afin de bâtir un
to
monde
act
plus sûr
together to build
et
a
plus solidaire.
safer and more united world.
Le monde est à la croisée des chemins.
The world stands at a
Les
crossroads.
tensions géopolitiques se multiplient et
Geopolitical tensions
alimentent
are
l'escalade
multiplying and fueling
plusieurs
the
conflits armés.
escalation of several armed conflicts.
des confrontations violentes dans des régions
Violent
sensibles,
confrontations in sensitive
même
regions
celles-ci au bord
are
d'un
pushing
embrasement
those regions
généralisé.
to the brink of
Cette situation
widespread
d'insécurité
conflagration.
et de recul de la paix
This situation
est
of
aggravée
insecurity and
par
setbacks to
le
peace is
terrorisme
being
qui sévit
worsened
dans
by
les régions comme le
terrorism
Sahel.
afflicting regions such as the
Ces conflits
Sahel.
anéantissent
These conflicts
progressivement
are gradually
des années de progrès et
wiping
de
out
développement en faveur
years
des
of
populations.
progress and development for our
C'est le
people.
lieu pour mon pays d'appeler à la mobilisation de la
My
communauté
country
internationale
believes this is the right time to call
faveur
on the international
des
community
populations du
to
Sahel,
mobilize for the
qui
people of the
paient
Sahel,
un lourd tribut
who are paying
dans la
a
guerre contre les
high
groupes
price in
terroristes.
the war against terrorist groups.
Fidèle à ses valeurs et à sa tradition
True
d'hospitalité,
to our values
la Côte
and our
d'Ivoire
tradition
accueille
of
dans les meilleures conditions
hospitality,
possibles
Côte d'Ivoire
plusieurs
is
milliers de
hosting in
ressortissants
the
des
best
pays
possible
sahéliens
conditions
voisins
several
fuient la
thousand
violence
nationals
des
from
groupes
neighboring
armés
Sahel countries
et
who are
au-delà du
fleeing the
Sahel,
violence of armed
c'est aujourd'hui
groups.
l'ensemble de l'Afrique de
Outside the
l'Ouest qui est menacée
Sahel, the
d'effondrement.
whole of West Africa is
Cette
currently
évolution
threatening to
pourrait
collapse.
se propager
This
propager
trend could
au-delà du
spread
continent
beyond
africain
the African continent
si aucune mesure
if
efficace
no
n'est
effective measures are
envisagée.
taken.
Pour sa part, la Côte d'Ivoire met à la
For its
disposition
part,
de
Côte
l'ensemble des
d'Ivoire
pays
is making available
l'Académie internationale de lutte contre le
the
terrorisme de
Jacquesville
Jacquesville
International Academy for
afin
Combating
de les aider à
Terrorism to
renforcer
all
leurs
countries
capacités en
in order to
matière de
help
lutte
them to build their
contre le
capacities
terrorisme sous
in
toutes ses formes.
counterterrorism, in
Monsieur le Président,
combating terrorism in all of its forms.
Les progrès réalisés par nos pays en
Mr.
matière de
President,
développement et
the
de
progress
sécurité
made by our
humaine
countries in development and
sont
human
aujourd'hui
security
fragilisés par les
is
effets du
currently
changement
being
climatique
undermined by the effects of climate
qui
change.
accentue les inégalités,
This heightens
la
inequalities,
pauvreté
poverty,
et entraîne le déplacement forcé de millions de
is
personnes
leading to the
chaque année.
forced displacement and leads to the forced displacement of millions of
L'accroissement
people every
incessant
year.
du nombre de réfugiés climatiques constitue une tragédie
The relentless rise in
de
the
notre
number
époque
of
qui nous
climate
interpelle
refugees is the tragedy of our time
Dans
and
ce
tugs on our
contexte,
collective consciousness.
La Côte d'Ivoire appelle les
In
Nations
this
Unies
context,
et
Côte
l'ensemble
d'Ivoire
des
calls on the United
partenaires
Nations and all of its
à
partners
accroître et à
to
intensifier
increase
leur
and to
assistance
intensify
humanitaire
their
d'urgence
emergency humanitarian
destinée à ces
assistance
populations durement
for
impactées.
hard-hit populations.
Mais nous devons aller plus loin sur la question
But we
climatique
must go further on the
et
climate
mettre
issue
résolument en œuvre des mesures qui nous
and
permettront
wholeheartedly
d'inverser à court
implement
terme
measures that
la
allow
courbe
us to,
dangereuse de réchauffement
in the
climatique
short term,
de notre
reverse the
planète
dangerous
et de
curve
ses
of global
conséquences sur nos
warming
sociétés.
and its consequences on our societies.
Pour cela, la Côte d'Ivoire réitère
To
son
that
appel
end,
aux pays
Côte
développés
d'Ivoire reiterates its
à
call
honorer
to
leurs
developed
engagements en
countries
matière de
to honor
financement
their
climatique
pledges in climate
et de
finance
soutien à la transition énergétique.
and in supporting the energy
Le fonds
transition.
pertes et dommages
The loss and damage
doit
fund
être abondé rapidement et être mis à
should
la
be rapidly
contribution
filled up
pour
and
soulager
used to
les populations
relieve
en
the
détresse
suffering
climatique.
of populations in
Mesdames
climate
et messieurs,
distress. Ladies and
En
gentlemen,
plus de faire face aux défis
in
sécuritaires et
addition to
climatiques,
facing security and climate
le
challenges,
monde est marqué par une révolution
the world
technologique.
is undergoing a
à laquelle
technological
peu de pays
revolution
sont
for which
préparés.
few countries are prepared.
L'intelligence artificielle est porteuse de
Artificial
promesses pour nos
intelligence harbors
sociétés,
great promise for our
mais
societies,
elle peut également présenter de
but it can
nombreuses
also
menaces et dérives
pose a
en
host
raison de
of
l'absence
threats
de
and is
réglementation
open
internationale
to abuse,
encadrant son
particularly
utilisation.
due to the lack of international regulations governing its use.
Il nous incombe de
Consequently,
veiller
it
à
falls
ce que
to us
cette
to
révolution
ensure
ne
that this
creuse pas
technological
davantage
revolution doesn't further
inégalités
widen inequalities
et n'entraîne
and
pas le
doesn't lead
déclassement
to
numérique d'une
a
partie de
digital
l'humanité,
downgrading of
mais qu'au
some,
contraire, elle
but
serve
rather, on the
le
contrary, that
progrès
it serves
et le bien-être de tous.
the progress and
C'est pour
well-being
cela que
for
mon pays se
all.
félicite de l'adoption du
For
pacte
this reason, my
numérique
country
mondial
welcomes the adoption of the Global
qui devrait
Digital
permettre une
Compact.
meilleure utilisation de cette avancée
This should
technologique
enable us to make
au
better
service du
use
progrès
of this technological
toutes les nations.
progress for all nations.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
à l'évidence, aucun pays ne peut
it's
à lui tout
clear
seul
that no single country
permettre au monde de surmonter
can
les défis
enable the
globaux
world
qui
to
sapent
overcome the
les
global
fondements de la
challenges that are
paix,
eroding the foundations
de
of
la
peace
sécurité,
and
ainsi
security,
que les progrès sociaux
as
accomplis au
well
cours des
as the
dernières
social
décennies.
progress that has been achieved over the last few
Face à ce
decades.
constat,
In light of this,
notre action collective doit
our
s'inscrire
collective
résolument
action should be
dans
firmly
le cadre
rooted
multilatéral
in the
unique des
unique
Nations Unies.
multilateral framework of the United Nations.
Le monde a véritablement besoin d'une organisation
The
des
world
Nations
truly
Unies
needs
dynamique,
a dynamic and effective
efficace.
United Nations
représentative de la
that
diversité des
represents the
peuples
diversity of peoples
et adossée au consensus des nations.
and has the
qui fonde
backing
sa
of the
légitimité.
consensus of nations that
Dans ce
underpins its legitimacy.
Les Nations Unies héritées du
In
XXe
this
siècle
context, the United Nations
doivent
that we've
être réformées
inherited
en
from the
profondeur
20th century must
pour jouer
undergo
pleinement leur
far-reaching
rôle dans
reform
le monde multipolaire
so that it can
d'aujourd'hui.
fully play its role in
Le
today's
Conseil de
multipolar
sécurité en
world.
particulier
In particular, the
doit
Security
s'ouvrir à
Council
l'Afrique dans
must
toutes les
open up to
catégories de
Africa
membres
in all
afin de
membership
refléter
categories
cette
in order
réalité.
to reflect this reality.
C'est donc à cette condition que notre organisation mondiale
This is an essential condition
pourra véritablement
for our
contribuer à
global
la résolution
organization to be
durable des
able to
conflits
truly contribute
en
to the
s'appuyant sur le
lasting
respect du
settlement of
droit
conflicts
international
based on
qui
respect
demeure
for
son
international
fondement.
law, which remains its foundation.
Il en est de même de la lutte contre le réchauffement climatique,
The same goes for
qui
the
dépend de
fight
la
against
capacité
climate
de notre
change, which
organisation
depends on
commune
the ability of our common
à mobiliser
organization
les États membres autour de
to
cette
rally member
priorité
states around this
et à
priority
les amener à
and
respecter leurs
encourage them
engagements
to honor their
pris dans ce
commitments
sens.
in this area.
La réforme de la gouvernance mondiale doit également
Global governance reform should also extend to multilateral financial institutions so that they can further support efforts to fund sustainable development goals in developing countries, while at the same time tackling the issue of debt.
Ces institutions doivent être plus inclusives.
These institutions should be more inclusive in how they operate
et dans leur prise de décision.
and how they take decisions.
Ces transformations profondes sont inévitables.
These deep-rooted transformations are inevitable and must
pour que
be
les
sped up
institutions soient véritablement au
so
service de
that
tous nos
these
pays
institutions truly work
service
to
de
assist
notre
all of
combat
our
contre la
countries
pauvreté
in combating poverty
et pour le développement.
and ensuring development.
Je tiens à saluer ici
Here I wish
le
to
secrétaire
pay
général des
tribute
Nations
to the
Unies
United Nations Secretary General
pour ses courageuses initiatives en
in
matière de
his
diplomatie
brave
préventive,
initiatives in preventive
de
diplomacy,
maintien de la consolidation de la
peacekeeping
paix,
and peacebuilding,
mais aussi de son engagement
but
en faveur de la
also
réforme de la
for
gouvernance
his
financière
commitment
mondiale.
to reforming global financial governance.
Nous avons collectivement des instruments pour
Together,
relever les
we
défis
have
qui
the right
perturbent le
tools
monde
to be able to meet the
et
challenges
pour donner à
facing the
notre
world
jeunesse et aux femmes
and to be able to
les
enable
moyens de
our
s'épanouir
young people and
et
women
de contribuer
to
plus que par le
flourish
passé
and to
au
contribute more than ever
développement de nos
before
pays.
to development in our countries.
L'avenir de l'Afrique réside dans sa jeunesse
Africa's future
et
lies
nous avons
in its
l'obligation
young
de
people.
bâtir pour elle
We owe it to
des
them
systèmes éducatifs et de
build
formation compétitifs
competitive education
et
and
des
training
institutions
systems,
démocratiques
as
protectrices.
well as democratic
leur liberté.
institutions that protect their freedoms.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames
Mr.
et
President,
Messieurs,
ladies and gentlemen,
mon pays croit fermement aux vertus du
my
multilatéralisme
country firmly believes in the values of multilateralism.
et que nous plaçons d'ailleurs au cœur
They are
de
indeed
nos
at the heart
interactions
of our interactions
avec les autres nations.
with other nations.
C'est ainsi qu'ensemble, nos États pourront dépasser,
Through multilateralism, together
les
our
grandes divisions,
states can overcome
bâtir des
great divisions,
consensus autour des questions
forge
difficiles
consensus around
et
difficult
faire avancer
issues,
des solutions
and put
globales
forward
aux grands défis
global
mondiaux.
solutions to major global
C'est
challenges.
cette vision qui détermine nos actions
This vision
dans la
determines
construction
how we
communautaire
act
régionale,
and how we contribute
tout
to
comme notre
regional
contribution aux
community
côtés des
construction,
autres pays
and also
dans
how we commit
l'édification d'un
alongside
monde
other
pacifique,
countries to building a peaceful,
solidaire et
united
prospère
and prosperous world
au bénéfice des
for the
générations
benefit
présentes et
of
futures.
present and future generations.
Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Vice President of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Dick Schoof, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you as a proud new participant in what for many of you is now a familiar gathering. Those words not only describe my own role, but say something about the very essence of the United Nations. For each of us, our presence here is only temporary. Some are here a long time, others for only a brief period. But everyone's time here is defined by their own individual era. Today again, we embody that long tradition. Today again, we come together to work towards goals whose size and scope exceed our present reach. Today again, each of us is staying the course. And when our time is at an end, we will pass the baton to the next generation. This is not to say that our course is always clear and never needs adjusting. On the contrary, our world is changing fast. And unfortunately, in some ways, not for the better. war and conflict in so many places, climate change, whose effects are becoming clearer by the day, and cyber threats we couldn't have imagined a few years ago. That is what I want to talk about today, anticipating an unknown future. And I should add, although the challenges of our time may be new, my message is not. It was clear to the Romans more than 2,000 years ago when Cicero wrote, "It is the duty of every statesman to anticipate the future, to discover some time in advance what may happen, whether for good or for ill, and never to have to say, 'I had not thought of that.'" Of course, predicting the future is not a simple matter. And I don't believe that's what Cicero meant. I think he was calling on us to take responsibility. Responsibility that goes beyond the scenarios we want to imagine, beyond our national borders, and above all, beyond short-term solutions. It may seem impossible, but here, more than anywhere, we know better. The history of the UN has shown time and again what can be achieved if we join forces and persevere. Without the UN, there would have been no climate agreements, no disarmament treaties, no development goals or international tribunals. We have come a long way, and we can still go much further. By finding in this unpredictable world our strength in stability, by returning to the very foundation of the United Nations, a shared sense of responsibility. To preserve that foundation, we must strengthen and improve our partnership. For example, by moving forward in the challenging reform debate. You won't be surprised to hear me say that the UN Security Council no longer reflects the realities of the 21st century. The seats must be divided better geographically to preserve the UN legitimacy, strength and vitality, with permanent African representation at the very least. This is a task for us all. And so the Kingdom of the Netherlands will fully support proposals that make such reforms possible. In other areas too, we must adapt much more quickly to the new reality. Because while war and conflict are resolved as time, the manner in which we wage them is always changing. And words we have used since the dawn of memory are no longer sufficient. Words like war and peace, everybody knows what they mean. But the world is no longer black and white. In recent years, we've been confronted with something that seems neither one nor the other. More and more countries are developing offensive cyber programs. And these pose a growing threat to our critical infrastructure, our security, our earning capacity, and our intellectual property. These are big challenges which force us to prepare for the future. We can't easily predict that future, but we can try to anticipate it. And that's exactly what we're doing. With the UN Pact for the Future, we have taken big steps in the right direction. From reforming our international financial architecture to tackling issues of cybersecurity and outer space. And surely, we can attribute this success to our shared desire to work towards a fair and secure life for everyone, for people today and the generations that follow. With that in mind, I'm proud of the Declaration on Future Generations, a key tool for achieving this goal, which was co-facilitated by Jamaica and the Kingdom of the Netherlands. This kind of broad international collaboration is what the UN is all about. And through every issue we tackle together, we increase our effectiveness. We need only look at climate change to see the importance of that. There are still countries that think this issue doesn't concern them, because they've been spared the direct effects so far, but that is an illusion. From flooding to drought, the effects of climate change are impacting people around the world. That includes part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and not least the small island developing states, countries where the rising sea level is not just a future threat, but a current reality. What's more, all the problems caused by climate change amplify each other. So climate change is not limited to those countries that are directly affected. In truth, every country is directly affected. And therein lies the key to our approach, cooperation. Of course, that means committing to the climate targets of the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, and the measure we agree at COP29. But it also means using each other's knowledge and know-how. And the Netherlands has a long history of managing water. Today, we use that experience around the world, We contribute our expertise on food security and countless other challenges as they arise. At the same time, we also face issues that will always demand our attention. Issues as old as the UN itself. Protecting human rights, defending democracy, and promoting the international legal order. There are so many countries where these values are under pressure. In Venezuela, for example, people are demanding that their voices be heard. And to them I say, we hear you. We hear you call for a democratic transition. Today, on this stage, I urge us not to forget those voices. And that's just one example. There are many more countries that feel forgotten, who wonder why the world is not paying attention to their suffering. Their day-to-day reality is also one of war, hunger, and poverty. Take Sudan, where 25 million people are facing acute hunger. We cannot close our eyes to this. We cannot turn away. We have a duty to listen and to take action. Earlier this year, the Kingdom of the Netherlands made an extra €10 million available, bringing its contribution to the crisis response in Sudan and surrounding countries to €80 million. But as we all know, that is just a drop in the ocean. I could run through a long list of other countries that need our help and support. I could try to describe their suffering, but it could never do it justice. You know, as well as I do, the places where war and conflict are raging. In Europe, for a long time, we thought that we no longer needed to worry about human rights, peace, and security. We thought that they were a given. But we were wrong, very wrong. Some of you may be thinking, not Ukraine again. But we need to address this, because the victims of the Russian war are not limited to Ukraine alone. This war affects everyone, as people in vulnerable countries know all too well. Since the global food supply has been deployed as a weapon of war, millions of people have been pushed back into hunger and poverty. They too are the victims of Russia. So to anyone still in doubt, I would say, this is not only a war between Russia and Ukraine, it's a war of aggression against everything that we in the United Nations stand for. The Charter of the United Nations, the very basis of our partnership, is clear on this subject. No state may use force against territorial integrity of any other state. And although it is up to Ukraine to set the conditions for a just and lasting peace, we cannot leave the responsibility of achieving that in practice to them alone. Ukraine deserves our help and support at every stage of the process. That means arranging and participating in a new dialogue on finding a path to peace. It means challenging those countries who support Russia's defense industry or help it circumvent sanctions. And it means calling Russia to account for its actions. There can be no impunity for its flagrant violation of the Charter. The Netherlands is fully committed to restoring justice for Ukraine. Yes, it is a process that will require time and great stamina. But that is something we have in abundance. We have the time, the patience, and the resources. For example, there are the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, two pillars of accountability, based in my own city, The Hague, the international city of peace and justice. And I don't need to tell anyone here how important it is for these institutions to be able to do their work freely and independently. And that too is our collective responsibility. While we're on the subject of collective responsibility, there is unfortunately another major conflict that demands our attention. Almost a year has passed since October the 7th. Almost a year since the terrorist organization Hamas committed its atrocities and war broke out in Gaza. The suffering since then has been extreme. Far too many innocent civilians have been killed, abducted or wounded. Far too many people have been forced to flee and have lost their loved ones and their property. In the past few days, there have been a large number of civilian casualties in Lebanon, and countless others in the region could face the same fate if the violence continues. That cannot be allowed to happen. A major regional war must be prevented at all costs, and so must any new attack on Israel. That begins with supporting international diplomatic initiatives, such as the proposal by the United States and France for a temporary ceasefire, which is supported by many countries, including in the region. We call on Israel and Lebanon to support this plan. Give diplomacy a chance. I know that when it comes to Israel and Gaza, people quickly refer to their entrenched positions. entire generations have grown up full of mistrust, fear, and even hate toward the other side. But if we try to take a longer view, we will see that there are no winners in this war. And any suggestion of winning for one side amounts only to a loss in the end. Loss on both sides. That's why political leadership and courage are needed now, on both sides. To break the endless cycle of violence and help them see the other for who they are, people, in search of a safe place to live. A place to live alongside each other, instead of at odds with each other. The first steps are obvious. An immediate ceasefire. The immediate and unconditional release of all remaining hostages. Rapid, large-scale aid for the people of Gaza, and all parties must comply with international law. I know it sounds easy, and I know that simply wanting something is not the same as making it happen. But as Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. Ladies and gentlemen, our history has always shown us that it is possible. We have come a long way, and we will still have a long way to go. But the path that lies behind us can also show us the way forward, as long as we hold on to what we believe in, our shared values, our common cause, and above all, our ability to persevere. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Nikol Pashinyan, Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this is my fourth speech at the UN General Assembly, and this speech will be significantly different from the previous ones. The key messages of my previous speeches were about the deadlock in achieving peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But today I want to say that peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan not only is possible, but is within reach. Why do I think so? For a few specific reasons. Quite recently, on August 30, Armenia and Azerbaijan signed the regulation on the joint activity of the Commissions on delimitation of the state border between the two countries. This is the first bilateral legal document signed between the parties. But what is more important with that document, Armenia and Azerbaijan agreed to set the 1991 Almaty Declaration as the basic principle of border delimitation between the two countries and will be guided by it. This means that Armenia and Azerbaijan de jure reconfirm the principle of recognizing each other's territorial integrity and inviolability of borders that existed during the Soviet Union, which is a fundamental factor for establishing peace. Now it is de jure reconfirmed that the two countries have no territorial claims on each other. What we have to do now is to take the next step and sign the agreement on establishment of peace and interstate relations between the Republic of Armenia and the Republic of Azerbaijan. The President of Azerbaijan and I have stated many times that at least 80% of the mentioned agreement has been agreed upon. Now, to seize this historic opportunity and to avoid the risk of reaching a deadlock, Armenia proposes to take what has already been agreed in the draft agreement, sign it, have a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and then go on with negotiations on pending issues. We are ready to do this right now. Why do we propose this? Because there is no precedent of a peace agreement or any agreement that would regulate and solve everything. It is practically not possible. After signing any agreement, two countries may always need to conclude new agreements and make new arrangements for this very reason. No matter how comprehensive any agreement, many important issues need to be further addressed. And in the case of Armenia and Azerbaijan, the agreed articles of the draft peace agreement actually contain provisions on peace, on not having territorial claims on each other, and not putting forward such claims in the future. Provisions on establishment diplomatic relations and a joint commission to oversee the implementation of the peace agreement. A provision on not interfering in each other's internal affairs, not using force and threat of force, and other important provisions. Signing the peace agreement with the already agreed articles will significantly facilitate the resolution of the non-agreed issues. The already agreed parts of the draft peace agreement provide tools for that. One of them is the diplomatic relations to be established between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the second is the joint Armenia-Azerbaijan Commission to oversee the implementation of the peace agreement. I mean the existence of de jure peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan by signing the proposed agreement, and the establishment of diplomatic relations will result in changing the overall atmosphere and the perception of our governments and peoples, which will significantly facilitate the solution of the remaining issues. Azerbaijan, however, insists that the Constitution of the Republic of Armenia is an obstacle to the peace agreement because it allegedly contains territorial claims on Azerbaijan. Without going into details, let me say that there is nothing of this kind in our Constitution. There are no territorial claims on Azerbaijan, and we can provide detailed written proofs regarding this to all our international partners concerned. Moreover, it is the Constitution of Azerbaijan that contains territorial claims on the Republic of Armenia, and we can present written argumentation on this as well to all our international partners concerned. But pay attention, we do not consider the Constitution of Azerbaijan as an obstacle to the peace agreement for the simple reason that the agreed part of the draft peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan contains wording that solves the problem, and that wording is as follows. None of the parties may invoke the provisions of its internal legislation as justification for its failure to perform the present agreement. Therefore, the signing of the agreement will address the concerns of both Armenia and Azerbaijan and will create legal guarantees for addressing them fundamentally. When we examine the agreed text of the peace agreement in terms of compliance with the Constitution of the Republic of Armenia, we see the following picture. Under the Constitution of Armenia, agreements that contradict the Constitution may not be ratified. And as in other cases, after signing the peace agreement with Azerbaijan, we must submit it to the Constitutional Court to verify the compliance of the agreement with the Constitution of the Republic of Armenia. If our Constitutional Court decides that the peace agreement with Azerbaijan is in contradiction with the Constitution of the Republic of Armenia, even though our experts assure that it is not likely to happen. But anyway, if that will happen, that we will face a specific situation where constitutional changes will be needed for the sake of achieving peace. And if our Constitutional Court decides that the agreement complies with the Constitution of the Republic of Armenia, then there will be no barriers for ratification in the Parliament of Armenia. And here, an extremely important circumstance comes in. Under paragraph 3 of Article 5 of the Constitution of the Republic of Armenia, ratified international agreements have precedence over the domestic legislation of the Republic of Armenia, and therefore, after the signing and ratification of the peace agreement with Azerbaijan, theoretically, even if there were laws that could be interpreted as containing territorial claims, these documents would be subordinate to the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace agreement and would automatically have no legal force. The same logic would apply to Azerbaijan, of course. Honorable President, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, here is peace so close to us, and all we need to do is reach out and take it. It is not easy for either Armenia or Azerbaijan, because each of us has our own truth, and the debate over those truths has led to enmity, casualties, and wars. The pain is very deep and intense, but we must now focus on peace, because peace is the only truth understandable to the people of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And this truth will open our eyes and shut down the sources of enmity, and we will all look to the future. Ladies and gentlemen, the Crossroads of Peace project of the government of the Republic of Armenia is also dedicated to that future. The purpose of the project is not only to open automobile routes, railroads, and other transport communications between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but also to provide communication between Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and the whole region, as well as to create opportunities for the passage of pipelines and cables, and eventually provide opportunities for people-to-people contacts, which is a key and critical factor for peacemaking. A key factor for peace and development is also that all this shall happen with due respect for the sovereignty, jurisdiction, territorial integrity of the countries, on the basis of the principle of equality and reciprocity. And we are ready to open our transport communications to both Azerbaijan and Turkey, as well as to our other neighbors and partners. And we are ready to do it even today, right today. By the way, the Crossroads of Peace can become a part of the middle corridor, ensuring greater speed and efficiency of the passage of goods through it. The Republic of Armenia is ready to fully ensure the safety of the passage of cargo, vehicles, and people on its territory. It is our wish, our commitment, and we can do it. By the way, all those claims that Armenia has agreed somewhere in some document that third forces shall provide the security of communications on its territory are simply distortion of reality. Armenia's commitment is clear to guarantee the safety of cargo, vehicles, and people on its territory, and we guarantee it. Honorable President, ladies and gentlemen, today I don't want to send any negative, worrying, or pessimistic message, not because they do not exist, but because the Armenian proverb says, "Let us speak the positive in order to be well," meaning that when you speak positive, good things tend to become reality. It may be that there is a similar saying in Azerbaijan, Turkey, Iran, Georgia, and in other countries in the world, and they all consider it their own. But let us speak the positive in order to be well is not about saying empty words. Of course, one should work hard and sometimes make hard decisions. In my speech, I laid out all the circumstances that give me a reason to speak the positive, to be well in front of this distinguished audience. And if we rely on these circumstances, good things will happen, initiating a process of reducing the circumstances that generate the negative. Thank you very much for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, Prime Minister of the Republic of Iraq. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
السيد رئيس الجمعية العامة،
السيد الأمين العام، السيدات والسادة الحضور، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. تأتي الدورة 79 لاجتماعات الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة في خضم ظروف خطيرة تمر على الشرق الأوسط والعالم. يواجه فيها النظام الدولي العالمي امتحانا صعبا يهدد وجوده ويجعله عاجزا عن تحقيق الأهداف التي تأسس من أجلها، ومنها الحفاظ على الأمن والاستقرار الدوليين وحقوق الإنسان، إذ نشهد اليوم سوابق تخرق فيها المواثيق والأعراف الدولية كافة، ويتم تحييد المؤسسات الدولية المفترض بها أن تساهم في إدارة العلاقات الدولية وتنظيمها بما يعزز السلم والاستقرار ويرتقي بالعلاقات الإنسانية بعيدا عن العنف والتعامل الوحشي. وجرى تجاهل مبادئ مهمة مثل السيادة والسلامة الإقليمية والتعاون المتعدد وقوانين الحرب والقوانين الإنسانية والقانون الدولي الإنساني ومسؤولية الحماية وحق تقرير المصير، وأصبح العالم يدفع دفعا إلى مواجهات وصراعات شاملة، بينما يقف مجلس الأمن الدولي عاجزا بلا دور. ومع غياب هذه المسؤولية قد يجري اللجوء إلى آليات بديلة، وتجاهل هذه المؤسسات ينذر بعودة العلاقات الدولية إلى حالة الفوضى. في ذات الوقت علينا أن لا ننسى الإشادة ببعض المواقف الشجاعة لبعض الشخصيات التي تترأس هذه المؤسسات الأممية، ومنهم الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة السيد أنطونيو غوتيريس. إلا أننا نرى وبوضوح وبالرغم من المجهودات الكبيرة غياب التأثير الفعال، أن إيقاف ما يحدث في فلسطين والمنطقة من انتهاكات هو مسؤولية الجميع، وبالدرجة الأساس مجلس الأمن الذي فشل في تحقيق أهم أهدافه، وهي الحفاظ على الأمن والسلم الدوليين وفي فلسطين المحتلة. اليوم نحن إزاء شعب يتعرض إلى اعتداء من قوة عسكرية محتلة تهجر الملايين بلا رادع وتقتل الآلاف، ويجري الحديث علنا عن تجويع جماعي لإبادة هذا الشعب وعن استخدام أسلحة نووية للقضاء عليه من قبل مسؤولين كبار في الكيان المحتل دون أي إجراءات رادعة. ولم يلتزم المجتمع الدولي أو أي من أعضائه بمسؤولية الحماية الواجبة عليهم وفق القانون الدولي. حرم الشعب الفلسطيني من حق العيش بكرامة في دولة كباقي الشعوب وسط عجز عالمي معيب، بل يجري تمكين المجرمين من التمادي والإيغال وتوسيع الصراع والهجوم على الآخرين من خلال دعمهم وضمان إفلاتهم المتكرر من العقاب. وكما شهدنا المزيد من الاستهتار الذي جعل القانون الدولي وقرارات مجلس الأمن مجرد حبر على ورق في سلسلة اعتداءات على دول المنطقة واحتلال الأراضي وضمها وتغيير الحدود الدولية باستخدام القوة وبالضد من قرارات مجلس الأمن الدولي، وهي سوابق خطيرة تهدد النظام الدولي برمته وتضرب عماد المؤسسات الدولية ما يرتب آثاراً وخيمة على الإنسانية جمعاء. وإمعاناً في التطرف يستدل الاحتلال بقرار مجلس الأمن رقم 1701 كذريعة للعدوان على لبنان، ويختار هذا القرار وبعضاً من بنوده بشكل انتقائي في حين يتجاهل القرارات العديدة والمبادئ التي لا تقبل الجدل في القانون الدولي الصادرة عن مجلس الأمن، من ضمنها القرارات 242 246 252 265 297. ونشهد حملة وحشية للقتل العشوائي واستخدام التكنولوجيا لتنفيذ التفجيرات عن بعد دون اكتراث للمدنيين العزل في سابقة خطيرة تؤشر مدى تورط حكومة الاحتلال وانغماسها في ارتكاب جرائم ضد الإنسانية. يقف العراق اليوم بشعبه وحكومته وبتوجيهات المرجعية الدينية العليا مع لبنان وشعبه الشقيق، وهو يواجه صفحة جديدة من العدوان الوحشي المبيت الساعي إلى إغراق المنطقة بالصراعات، وهو ما سبق أن حذرنا منه، وسنمضي بتقديم كل مساعدة ممكنة لتجاوز آثار هذه الاعتداءات. موقفنا هذا مبني على تاريخ من الترابط وثبات عراقي معروف يرفض العدوان والاحتلال ويرفض سلب حق الشعوب في أرضها وتراثها ومقدساتها، ويدين مكررا أي دعم دولي أو تسويغ لمنطلقات المعتدي. كما نسجل الاستهداف الممنهج المستمر
للوكالات الدولية والمنظمات الإغاثية في الأراضي المحتلة والجرأة في إلحاق الأذى بأفرادها ومنها وكالات الأمم المتحدة بما في ذلك وكالة الأمم المتحدة للإغاثة وتجهيز لاجئي فلسطين ونروى في غزة التي من المفترض أن تكون محمية بموجب القانون الدولي. وأود التذكير بأن هذه التعديات لا تعطل العمل الإنساني فحسب بل تنتهك أيضا المعايير الدولية التي تحمي المدنيين والقائمين على تقديم المساعدة في مناطق الصراع. أن هذه التحركات الأخيرة للاحتلال تبتغي تهديد استقرار بلدان المنطقة عبر إشعال حرب إقليمية واسعة النطاق، وأن العراق بصفته عضوا مؤسسا للأمم المتحدة يأمل بأن تحقق هذه المؤسسة الأهداف التي تأسست من أجلها في حفظ السلم والأمن وتجنيب العالم مخاطر الحروب والمآسي التي ذاقها على مر التاريخ. اسمحوا لنا أن نعبر عن خيبة أملنا إزاء عدم نجاح مجلس الأمن والمنظومة الدولية في الوفاء بواجباتها. السيدات والسادة، نلاحظ زيادة كبيرة في جرائم الكراهية والتعصب التي تؤثر على أمننا واستقرارنا، ونحن بأمس الحاجة إلى التعاون الدولي من أجل إشاعة روح التسامح والاحترام المتبادل ومكافحة خطاب الكراهية والتمييز والعنف الذي هو في تزايد مضطرد حول العالم، حيث نرى أن أحد أوجه خطاب الكراهية البارز هو تنامي ظاهرة الإسلاموفوبيا التي تقوض الجهود العالمية لتحقيق السلام والأمن والتعايش وتهيئ الأجواء لهجمات تستهدف قيمنا الاجتماعية والأخلاقية التي هي جزء من وجودنا الإنساني. لذلك أدعو الأمم المتحدة إلى بذل جهود أكبر لتعزيز الحوار والتفاهم بين الثقافات والأديان المختلفة، وأؤكد على ضرورة تعزيز الوحدة والوئام في مواجهة الاستقطاب المتزايد، مع التأكيد على ضرورة وقوف قادة الدول ورؤساء المؤسسات الدولية ضد التعصب الديني والكراهية. أصحاب السيادة، أما في العراق وعلى النقيض مما تقدم فهناك تطورات طيبة، فالبلد الذي احتل داعش في أراضيه وكان الكثير من المراقبين يرى بأنها كانت نهاية العراق الذي نعرفه اليوم، وبعد 10 أعوام يشهد تنفيذ خطة شاملة للإعمار والتنمية وإعادة الحياة إلى المدن، وترتفع المباني العالية والبنى التحتية ويعم الأمان. ولا زال أمامنا الكثير من التحديات الأساسية في تحقيق الإصلاحات الاقتصادية والإدارية والبيئية وتنويع الاقتصاد، ولقد خطونا خطوات كبيرة في مجال تحقيق الأمن وحققنا انتصارا على الإرهاب، وقريبا سنتوج هذا الانتصار على هذا التنظيم الإرهابي بإعلان مشترك ومهم مع حلفائنا وأصدقائنا الذين وقفوا إلى جانب العراق وساندوه ضد عدو وحشي شكل خطرا على العالم أجمع. وتنصب جهودنا على تعزيز العملية الديمقراطية في العراق والعمل على ترسيخ العقد الاجتماعي والتلاحم الوطني وفق ما اختاره شعبنا في دستوره الدائم لعام 2005، حيث قد نظمنا انتخابات مجالس المحافظات والتي كانت معطلة منذ 10 سنوات، وبعد أن تعرقل تنظيمها في كركوك منذ عام 2005، والآن بصدد تنظيم انتخابات برلمان إقليم كردستان العراق. وجهودنا مستمرة في تعزيز علاقة الحكومة الاتحادية بحكومة الإقليم وبالحكومات المحلية في المحافظات وفق ما رسمه الدستور والقانون، وحماية وجود الأقليات والأطياف المتآخية وتأمين احتياجاتهم، حيث أن من بين أولوياتنا هو إشاعة العدل والحفاظ على التنوع في بلدنا الذي نعده من أهم ثرواتنا. سيداتي السادة، إن أولويات هذه الحكومة 5: توفير فرص العمل وتحسين الخدمات ومحاربة الفقر ومكافحة الفساد وتنفيذ الإصلاحات الاقتصادية. تسعى الحكومة العراقية إلى إعادة تأهيل الموارد البشرية اللازمة، وأنجزت خطوات واسعة في بناء مؤسسات الدولة وفرض سلطة القانون، كما تسعى إلى تفعيل دور القطاع الخاص ومعالجة الترهل الإداري وتنويع مصادر الدخل وإصلاح القطاع المصرفي والمالي وإدارة التحول في مجال الطاقة ومعالجة أسباب الاضطرابات الاجتماعية والاقتصادية وبالتالي السياسية. حيث يشكل هذا التحول بالنسبة للعراق أمرا معقدا بسبب التحدي الهيكلي الاقتصادي المتمثل بالاعتماد على القطاع العام في استيعاب القوى العاملة واستهلاك مداخيل النفط في دفع رواتب الملايين من الموظفين. فإن التحدي المزدوج الذي يواجه العراق هو الاعتماد المفرط على مداخيل النفط وتحجيم قدرته على التنويع الاقتصادي، وجاء هذا نتيجة عقود من الحروب والحصار الاقتصادي وسياسات النظام الدكتاتوري الاقتصادية العبثية وبعض جوانب سوء التقدير والإدارة فيما بعد وهدر الموارد البشرية والمادية القابلة للتنمية. كما أن الحوكمة ومكافحة الفساد وإنجاز التحول الرقمي والحكومة الإلكترونية من أبرز أولوياتنا بوصفها أهم استراتيجيات الحد من الفساد والحكم الرشيد، ولكننا ننتظر من المجتمع الدولي دعم جهودنا في استرداد الأموال المنهوبة التي هي حق للعراق وإنهاء العقبات القانونية والتشريعية التي تضعها بعض الدول في سبيل توفير ملاذ آمن لأموال الفساد مثل السرية المصرفية ومنع الكشف عن المالكين المنتفعين للمساعدة في التهرب من المحاسبة. السيدات السادة، إن العراق يسعى إلى تحقيق الأمن والاستقرار الإقليمي عن طريق إيجاد سبل الشراكات البناءة لمواجهة التحديات المشتركة من خلال التعاون بين الأطراف المشاركة وزيادة الاعتمادية التبادلية بطريقة تصب في مصلحة الجميع، ونخطط لطرح مبادرات تعكس التكامل الاقتصادي والاستقرار الإقليمي في المنطقة، وعلى رأسها مشروع طريق التنمية الذي يهدف إلى تحويل العراق إلى مرتكز إقليمي رئيسي للتجارة والمواصلات وربط الشرق الأوسط بأوروبا عبر العراق باستخدام شبكة من السكك الحديدية والطرق السريعة والمدن الصناعية وربط ميناء الفاو الكبير في جنوب العراق بأوروبا عن طريق دول في المنطقة. يمثل هذا المشروع أهم خطوات تعزيز التعاون والتكامل الإقليمي ويتماشى مع أهداف العراق الأوسع في إعادة بناء الاقتصاد وتحسين الخدمات. السيدات والسادة، يواجه العراق تحديات بيئية جسيمة نتيجة للتغيير المناخي والتصحر، وهي تحديات لا يمكن التصدي لها بدون تعزيز التعاون الدولي، إذ يؤدي التصحر وانكشاف الغطاء النباتي إلى نزوح الملايين بحثا عن الاستقرار، الأمر الذي يفاقم الأزمات الاجتماعية والسياسية. إننا ندعو إلى التكاتف الدولي لمواجهة التحديات البيئية والعمل على زيادة الوعي بأهمية الإدارة المستدامة للموارد المائية التي تعتبر قضية محورية بالنسبة للعراق، كما أن هذا التحدي يتطلب الالتزام بمبدأ المسؤولية المشتركة والعادلة بين الدول، إذ يواجه تحديات وجودية تتعلق بنقص حاد في الموارد المائية بما يهدد الزراعة وينعكس سلبا على الاقتصاد ويهدد حياة الملايين من العراقيين. ومن هنا فإن الحكومة تولي أولوية قصوى لهذه الملفات وتعمل بالتعاون مع دول الجوار للوصول إلى حلول مستدامة وسياسات للتعامل مع هذه المؤثرات. أخيرا أود أن أعرب عن امتنان العميق للأمم المتحدة على الدعم الذي قدمته للعراق خلال العقدين الماضيين، ونحن نتطلع إلى مرحلة جديدة من التعاون مع الأمم المتحدة في العراق ستبدأ بنهاية عام 2000 2025 ونأمل أن يكون ذلك إذانا ببداية حقبة جديدة مليئة بالاستقرار والازدهار لشعبنا وصفحة جديدة من صفحات الشراكة مع الأمم المتحدة ونحن نعمل بجد لبناء مستقبل أفضل لأجيالنا القادمة ونتطلع إلى استمرار الشراكة مع المجتمع الدولي لتحقيق ذلك. إن اختيار العراق لرئاسة مجموعة ال77 والصين لعام 2025 يعد انتصارا للدبلوماسية العراقية المنتجة والساعية إلى تحقيق أهداف التنمية وردم الفجوة التكنولوجية بين دول الشمال ودول الجنوب وتحقيق التكامل وإصلاح المنظومة الاقتصادية الدولية. ونتطلع خلال رئاستنا لأكبر مجموعة دولية تنضوي في عضويتها 134 دولة للعمل نحو عالم أكثر استقرارا وعدالة تتفاعل وتتوفر فيه فرص التنمية لشعوب العالم كافة. وفي الختام إن سياستنا تضع العراق وشعبه وأمنه وسيادته وازدهاره أولا ونمضي بكل ثقة في محو آثار الماضي بما فيه من حروب وديكتاتورية وإرهاب مثلما نمضي في إعمار العراق ووضعه في مكانته الإقليمية والدولية التي يستحقها بجدارة. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Republic of Iraq. The Assembly will hear an address by Excellency Kyriakos Mitsotakis, Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen. This is the sixth occasion on which I have addressed the United Nations General Assembly as Greece's Prime Minister, but it is the first in which I stand before you as the leader of a country which is an incoming member of the United Nations Security Council. Greece is honored to accept that responsibility for the third time, and I'm personally grateful for the trust the broader UN membership has placed in our candidacy for the 2025-2026 term. Three words of Greek origin but of universal meaning will guide Greece's upcoming tenure on the Security Council: dialogue, diplomacy, and democracy. And six core priorities underpin these guiding principles: the peaceful settlement of disputes, respect for international law and the rules and principles of the UN Charter, women, peace and security, climate, peace and security, children in armed conflict, and of course, as a seafaring nation, maritime security. Ladies and gentlemen, addressing you today, 12 months on from last time round in September 2023, I don't think any of us can claim we are somehow better off now than we were back then. If anything, our world grows less secure by the day. Whether it be escalating conflicts, geopolitical division, the climate crisis, mass migration, rising inequality, even the unchecked rise of artificial intelligence, these challenges jeopardize our present and our future. And yet, within these threats lie unique opportunities to transform the way we live, govern, and cooperate on a global scale. We are indeed at an inflection point. What happens next depends to a high degree on international cooperation. It is here in this chamber where we represent the collective voice of the international community that we are called to act for the good of the entire humanity. And to do that effectively, we must reinvigorate and strengthen the multilateral system. Most of us, if not all, have agreed on the need to reform the UN, and especially the Security Council. And since it first sat in 1946, the UN Security Council has not undergone any significant institutional reform. In that sense, it is the relic of a world that no longer exists. Back then, it was fit to address the challenges and opportunities of the post-Second World War world. But today, it is clearly not fit to solve the complex problems of the present or the future. As far as the Security Council reform is concerned, I believe we all agree that it is essential to increase the meaningful participation of underrepresented nations. Nearly a third of UN member states have never sat on the Security Council. In addition, the enlargement of the Security Council must include both non-permanent and permanent members. New permanent members must include leading countries from all continents, and the composition of the Security Council should reflect the geopolitical and economic realities of the third decade of the 21st century, not the fifth decade of the 20th. Ladies and gentlemen, in the Security Council, Greece will do its utmost to act as a stabilizing actor. And that work begins immediately in our immediate neighborhood. After all, as a gateway to Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, Greece sits 900 miles away from both Gaza and Ukraine. A year ago, we did not know that on October 7th, a horrific terrorist attack would leave more than 1,200 innocent civilians, men, women, and children massacred. Around 250 people would be taken hostages, and that in the war that ensured, over 41,000 people would perish. The ongoing violence in the Middle East is grave, and civilians' horrendous suffering in Gaza is unfortunately continuing. Escalation threatens to trigger a full-scale war in the region. And Greece calls on all parties, including Iran and those it has influence over, to back away from perpetuating the current destructive cycle of violence, to lower tensions and engage constructively in the pursuit of meaningful de-escalation. A full-scale war in southern Lebanon must be avoided at all costs. People on both sides of the border have a right to leave peacefully without the threat of rockets or bombs shattering their lives. Greece fully supports the proposal for an immediate 21-day ceasefire. And in the wake of the October 7th attacks, Greece has always and will always support Israel's legitimate right to defend itself. But how it does so matters. We must see the immediate return of all remaining hostages. There must be an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The humanitarian catastrophe there cannot go on. Safe access to food, water, shelter, clothing, and medicines throughout the territory must be ensured, and international humanitarian law must be respected. However remote, however impossible it may seem today, Israelis and Palestinians must be given the chance to live side by side in peace and security, and there is no other way than to make the two-state solution a reality. And there's an absolute need to give the Palestinians hope for the future. This is a sine qua non for peace, stability, and security in the region, including, let me repeat, including the long-term security of Israel. And building a fully functioning and sovereign Palestinian state will take concerted efforts by all sides involved, the actors in the wider region, but of course, the international community as a whole. But there is no other option to bring about lasting peace in this turbulent part of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, a year ago, we were already in the second year of Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. And since February 2022, Russia has brought violence, misery, and destruction back to the European continent. Tens of thousands have been killed. Millions have been displaced from their homes. The impact on civilian infrastructure and people's lives and livelihoods is colossal. We stand in solidarity with the Ukrainian people, who are fighting for their freedom and independence, and for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of their country. And respect for the territorial integrity of all states is the fundamental pillar of international law. It is the cornerstone of the UN Charter. In June, at the Summit on Peace in Ukraine, Greece stood shoulder to shoulder with many other UN member states, calling for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, in full respect of Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and international integrity within its internationally recognized borders. From the first hours of the Russian aggression, the European Union and its member states rose to the occasion, providing every possible support to the Ukrainians. We're committed to continue to do so. Why? The answer is simple. The war in Ukraine is not simply another local or a regional European conflict. It's a brutal challenge to international stability and to the international rules-based order that the UN stands for. And as such, it concerns the entire global community. Needless to also recall the very concrete impact this war has had on international food security, affecting economies and basic needs of populations around the world, especially in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Greece has been placed by geography in a complicated neighborhood, and I have repeatedly spoken from this stand on the difficult and at times tense relationship with neighboring Turkey. Over the past year, I have met President Erdogan 6 times, including our recent meeting on the sidelines of this assembly, a couple of days ago. Last December, we signed the Athens Declaration, a document stating our intention to resolve our differences according to the principles of international law and in the spirit of good neighborly relations. And we will continue to explore how to improve bilateral relations with Turkey. There is potential for increased cooperation to tackle common challenges such as climate change and migration. We will continue to keep channels of communication open to diffuse any tension that may arise. Greece is willing to work towards resolving the only major outstanding issue we have with our neighbor, the delimitation of the continental shelf and the exclusive economic zone in the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean. We have not been able to effectively address this difference for more than 40 years. But this does not mean that it is destined to remain unresolved. And I was glad to hear President Erdogan say that the limitation of maritime zones, in accordance with international law, is to the common interest of the entire region of the Eastern Mediterranean. And I strongly believe that we have today a window of opportunity, and we should be bold enough and wise enough to seize this chance. But if we are to try, we should both adopt a consistent approach in every aspect of our behavior towards each other. On the other hand, when it comes to Cyprus, where this year marked the 50th anniversary of Turkey's illegal invasion and subsequent occupation of over a third of the territory of the Republic of Cyprus, we unfortunately see no progress in Turkey's position. This invasion was and remains a violation of the fundamental principles of the UN Charter. As Prime Minister of Greece, I reaffirm here today our commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Cyprus and to a solution on the basis of a bizonal bicommunal federation with a single sovereignty, a single citizenship, and a single international personality in accordance with the relevant UN Security Council resolutions. A two-state solution cannot and will not be accepted. It is simply not a solution. President Christodoulidis gave yesterday from this podium an impassionate and sincere address recalling the violence and trauma of the Cyprus invasion 50 years ago. He also expressed his unwavering commitment to engaging in order to find a solution. And I, for one, have absolute trust in this commitment. He's right to argue that international law cannot be applied a la carte and that history cannot be rewritten or erased. Greece fully supports the efforts of the Secretary General for the resumption of negotiations within this framework. And we call upon Turkey and the Turkish Cypriot community to come to the negotiating table, to at least establish mutual trust and to engage in a frank and honest discussion in pursuit of a mutually acceptable, just and viable solution. And can you imagine how powerful a message for the world community it would send to all those seeking peace in seemingly intractable conflicts around the world if we can find a permanent, viable, and just solution to the Cyprus question? Ladies and gentlemen, let me also mention the other side of our neighborhood and its future, the Western Balkans. As the oldest European Union member in the region, Greece has always had a vision for the Western Balkans inside the European Union family. A vision that would reduce tensions and conflict and embed the rule of law and fundamental freedoms, driving development and prosperity for its people. There has been progress, but that progress has not been enough. 21 years after the Thessaloniki Agenda, significant challenges remain. And allow me to be very frank. The countries of the Western Balkans need to take the definitive decision to leave behind the traumatic legacy of the past. And the political leadership of the Western Balkans needs to choose by action, not by words, to embrace a European future. By improving democratic governance, consolidating the rule of law and freedom of expression, pursuing difficult internal reforms, and very, very importantly, committing to good neighborly relations. Reviving nationalist narratives and agendas should have no place today in a region on the cusp of joining the EU. And let's start with the basics. International agreements must be respected and implemented fully and in good faith, whether we're talking about Dayton or Prespa or the Belgrade-Pristina agreements. There are disruptors who would like nothing more than to cause new divisions in this sensitive corner of Europe. And it is time to relegate the famous phrase of Winston Churchill that the Balkans produce more history than they can consume once and for all to the history books. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by addressing briefly two issues critical to our shared future: the advent of artificial intelligence and the adverse effects of digital technology, especially on our children and our teenagers. The power of AI seems limitless, a technology with the potential to change our world in a way that will probably surpass the advent of the personal computer, the launch of the mobile phone, or the birth of the World Wide Web. Like steam or electricity before it, AI, as a general technology, presents huge opportunity to transform for good the way we live, we collaborate, we progress as humankind. And if used correctly, it could very well be driving solutions across science, climate change, R&D, medicine. For our governments, AI has enormous power to enhance productivity, facilitate more effective decision-making, and deliver more efficient and higher impact public services. It is indeed a game changer. However, AI also has the potential to do extraordinary harm. Unchecked and in the hands of malign actors, AI could yet become a weapon of control in an uncertain world order. We're already seeing how generative AI is used to create more and more convincing deep fakes designed to spread misinformation and disinformation. And it is not lost on me standing here in this assembly, created to protect peace and security and promote global dialogue, that our world is being shaped by transnational actors in the form of a few very large technology companies with more economic muscle than most of the countries represented here. And this is leading to an imbalance that we must address. Those driving the technologies that are fundamentally reshaping the societies are essentially not accountable, and that needs to change. They, like us, in the end, have a responsibility towards humanity. And unlike with climate change, where we continue to convene globally to discuss national contributions every year within the context of a global problem, with AI there is no such framework. The European Union is trying to rectify that. But just as with climate, the EU alone cannot address this challenge. And here I would like to praise the final report governing AI for humanity, presented just a few days ago by the high-level advisory body on AI established by the Secretary General. The recommendations of this report can truly contribute to an agile and adaptable regime of global governance of AI that helps showcase the benefits of AI and address its risks. Bluntly, if both a compact for the future and a global digital compact we agreed this week are to have any effect, then we may need to put the regulation and application of AI on a global footing. Eventually, what we may need is a COP for AI, with the participation not just of countries, but also of the global technology companies. And this is an issue of the utmost urgency for one additional reason, and let me conclude with that. We are already witnessing the adverse effect of digital technology and AI-driven algorithm on the mental health of our children and our teenagers. It took over a quarter of a century for campaigners to install seatbelts in cars, despite the fact that all the evidence pointed to belts saving lives. We are in a similar situation today when it comes to children and teenagers and their use of digital and social media platforms. Every day, children around the world are being exposed to content that exasperates feelings of loneliness and unrealistic standards of beauty. Frequently, our teenagers are pulled into extremist echo chambers. Bullying, once contained to the real world, now has its virtual twin. It follows children home from school and materializes on phones and tablets and bedrooms. Social media algorithms are constantly improved by AI to keep children online for the maximum amount of time and away from the real world of unsupervised play, and all for the purpose of making money. Countless studies have shown that heavy use of social media is linked to depression, feelings of isolation, sleep deprivation, and addiction. The brains of our children are being rewired and their development changed at an almost unimaginable scale. Yet we do nothing, or very little. That is why I applaud initiatives, such as the one announced by Australia, for putting an age limit on social media use with age verification technologies that cannot be circumvented. Others should follow suit. Technology companies must come to the table and show that they will take tangible and measurable safety and prioritize safety over profits. If they don't, pragmatic solutions like banning devices in our schools, which Greece has implemented as of this year, will be complemented by harsher regulatory responses. Digital technology is no different than any other industry that needs to operate under health and safety regulations. The overarching principle, the golden standard, is one and the same: do no harm. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a rapidly changing world. We cannot let our differences be an excuse for inaction. And as Greece takes its seat on the Security Council, we do so mindful of the importance of our core principles: dialogue, diplomacy, democracy. And this week's summit of the future demonstrates that it is truly possible when we work together to renew multilateral cooperation through these principles, and reiterating the commitment of all member states to the core values of the UN, we can still galvanize international resolve and forge innovative partnerships to address both the world's current and emerging challenges. And Greece stands ready to help the United Nations do its part in the 2 years ahead. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Keir Starmer, Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I address the General Assembly today as someone with a deep belief in the principles of this body and the value of international cooperation. I remember reading the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a student. It had a profound impact on me. I spent my career as a lawyer working to protect those rights. And the Declaration still inspires me now as Prime Minister, because it speaks about our inherent dignity, the very essence of what it is to be human, of equal and inalienable rights, based on a foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Yet as we meet here today, that can feel like a distant hope. Conflict touches more countries now than at any time in the history of this Assembly. Around the world, more fires are breaking out and burning with ever greater intensity, exacting a terrible toll. In Gaza, Lebanon, Ukraine, Sudan, Myanmar, Yemen, and beyond. The vast majority of humanitarian need in the world today is driven by conflict. After 20 years of gains in tackling poverty, disease, and in health, war is one of the main regions that progress has stalled. That is a catastrophe made by human hands. It has weakened the cause of cooperation, sowed political division between North and South, and turned the geopolitical dial away from the rule of law towards brute force and aggression. And this matters to us all. It matters to the British people. My government was elected to change Britain, to deliver national missions on higher growth, safer streets, cleaner energy, more opportunity, and a healthier society. But behind every one of these missions sits another insight, something that used to be unspoken, but now needs to be said, that we recognize that our success in Britain can never be separated from events beyond our shores. Global challenges rebound on us at home, and to grapple only with the effects of war, poverty, climate change, pandemics, or irregular migration when they arrive on our doorstep is to set ourselves up to fail. We must work with others to solve these problems at root, to tackle the causes. Britain is stronger when we do so. So we are changing our approach on the global stage too. My message today is this: we are returning the UK to responsible global leadership, because I think the international system can be better. We need it to be better. People talk about an age of polarization, impunity, instability, an unraveling of the UN Charter. And I fear that a sense of fatalism has taken hold. But our task is to say, no, we won't accept this slide into greater and greater conflict, instability, and injustice. Instead, we will do all we can to change it. This is the moment to reassert fundamental principles and our willingness to defend them, to recommit to the UN, to internationalism, to the rule of law, to work together for peace, progress, and equality. Because it is right, yes, absolutely, but also because it is plainly in our self-interest. So we are ready to step up in a spirit of respect and equal partnership. I don't claim that solving these problems is easy, but there are positive, practical things that we can do together. This starts with addressing the rising tide of conflict and preventing a regional war in the Middle East. I call on Israel and Hezbollah, stop the violence, step back from the brink. We need to see an immediate ceasefire to provide space for a diplomatic settlement. And we are working with all partners to that end, because further escalation serves no one. It offers nothing but more suffering for innocent people on all sides, and the prospect of a wider war that no one can control, and with consequences that none of us can foresee. This is intimately linked with the situation in Gaza, where again we need to see an immediate ceasefire. It shames us all that the suffering in Gaza continues to grow. The answer is diplomacy, the release of all the hostages, and the unfettered flow of aid to those in need. That is the only way to break this devastating cycle of violence and begin the journey towards a political solution for the long term, which delivers the long-promised Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel. We must also work together for peace in Sudan and a proper response to the worst humanitarian crisis in the world today. We need to see greater action to deliver aid and to deliver peace. The world cannot look away. And we must stand up for international law. And that's why we are so resolute in our support for Ukraine. They are exercising their right to self-defense as provided for under the UN Charter and recognized by 141 members of this Assembly. We will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes, because the alternative would be to confirm the worst claims about this place, that international law is merely a paper tiger, and that aggressors can do what they will. We will never let that happen, because it is our duty to respond to a more dangerous world with strength, to keep our people safe. But alone, that's not enough. That's not the limit of our responsibility. We must also work together to make the world less dangerous. And so we have to face some hard truths. The institutions of peace are struggling, underfunded, under pressure, and over-politicized. The entire framework of arms control and counter-proliferation, painstakingly constructed after decades, has begun to fall away. Iran continues to expand its nuclear activity in violation of its international commitments. Incredible new technologies like AI are being deployed for military use without agreed rules. These are difficult challenges to grip and too urgent to ignore. That's why the new Pact for the Future is so important. We must put new energy and creativity into conflict resolution and conflict prevention, reverse the trend towards ever greater violence, make the institutions of peace fit for purpose, and hold members to their commitments under the UN Charter. But again, reducing conflict is not the limit of our responsibility. Other global challenges impact us too. So we must work to get the SDGs back on track. So, Mr. President, under my leadership, the UK will lead again, tackling climate change at home and internationally, and restoring our commitment to international development. Like many of you, in a few weeks' time, I will be travelling to Samoa for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, where a generation of children are having to contemplate fleeing their island of their birth for good. The threat of climate change is existential, and it's happening in the here and now. So we have to reset Britain's approach. We have lifted the de facto ban on onshore wind in England, ended new oil and gas licenses, and created Great British Energy as we become the first major economy to transition to clean power by 2030. And I'm pleased to tell you that, yes, we will meet our net zero target, backed up with an ambitious NDC at COP29, consistent with limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. And we'll support others to do the same. I know that finance is at the heart of this, so the UK will continue to be a leading contributor to international climate finance that includes supporting nature and forests, because this is vital for biodiversity and reducing emissions. And it includes funding for climate adaptation, because those who did not cause this crisis should not be left to cope with the consequences. And the UK will also continue to be a leading contributor to development, committed to returning to 0.7% when fiscal circumstances allow. But let's be frank, public finance will never fully meet the needs, so we must use it as a multiplier to unlock much greater levels of private investment, and we have already started this work. I can announce today that we're creating a new facility, the British International Investment, which will work with the City of London to mobilise billions in pension and insurance funds to invest in boosting development and fighting climate change. This is a great British innovation, and if we're going to deliver in each of the areas I've talked about today, with all the benefits that we'll bring, then this is the kind of approach that we need to take. Innovating, thinking differently, moving faster, and being ready to change how we do things in 3 key areas. First, we must change the international financial system to deliver a fairer deal for developing countries. We will use our seat on the boards of the IMF and the World Bank to argue for a bolder approach to tackle unsustainable debt, which is compounding poverty and inequality, depriving the sick of healthcare and children of education. We must tackle the barriers to investment, which choke off the flow of private finance, and we must put a price on the true cost of emissions through a new levy on global shipping, with the proceeds going to tackle climate change and cut emissions even further. Crucially, we need to accelerate reform of the multilateral development banks so that they shoulder more risk, unlocking hundreds of billions more to help the poorest and build a low-carbon global economy. A critical milestone in the fight against poverty is approaching, with the replenishment of the International Development Association. This is the chance for everyone to show greater ambition so the IDA can be a bigger and better, helping more people, especially those in fragile states and conflict zones. On that basis, we will be ambitious too. We will increase our pledge and play our part in seizing the potential of this moment. Second, if we want the system to deliver for the poorest and most vulnerable, then their voices must be heard. We need to make the system more representative and more responsive to those who need it most. So we will make the case, not just for fairer outcomes, but fairer representation in how we reach them. And this also applies to the Security Council. It has to change to become a more representative body, willing to act, not paralyzed by politics. We want to see permanent African representation on the Council. Brazil, India, Japan, and Germany as permanent members, and more seats for elected members as well. Finally, to support this, we will also change how the UK does things, moving from the paternalism of the past towards partnership for the future. Listening a lot more, speaking a bit less, offering game-changing British expertise, and working together in the spirit of equal respect. Joining the Paris Pact for People and Planet, pursuing a new global clean power allowance, standing for the new term on the Human Rights Council, and joining forces to tackle the toughest challenges, like antimicrobial resistance, preparedness for the next pandemic, and outbreaks of deadly diseases like Mpox. We are ready to work with all UN members because the scale of the challenges we face demands it, and our prosperity and security depends on it. I say it again, all this matters to Britain. Mr. President, by tackling conflict, making progress in the fight against climate change and poverty, and reforming the international system so that it's fit for the 21st century, we can realise the hope and the promise that shine through the founding documents of this organisation. Together, in all our interests, we can change direction from the dangerous, destructive path we find ourselves on and turn instead towards the rule of law, towards cooperation, responsibility and progress, towards peace. Thank you. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency K.P. Sharma Oli, Prime Minister of Nepal. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, the heads of state and government, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I stand here as a humble representative of 30 million proud Nepali people. At the very outset, allow me to extend my sincere congratulations to you, Mr. President, and distinguished members of the Bureau on your well-deserved elections. I would also like to reaffirm Nepal's full support as you undertake the important responsibilities entrusted to you. We extend our deepest appreciation to His Excellency, Mr. Denis Francis, and the outgoing President, for his commendable leadership in successfully guiding the 78th session of the Assembly. Our highest accolades are due to the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his tireless dedication to reinforcing multilateralism and tackling global challenges. I fondly recall your visit to Nepal last year, Mr. Secretary General, and your message of peace from the sacred birthplace of Gautam Buddha, and the message of climate catastrophe of mountains from the Everest region. Mr. President, the world is at a watershed moment in history. The contrast between rich and poor, harmony and hatred, and economic development and environmental destruction have never been as stark as they are today. Both people and planet stand on the brink of climate catastrophe. Geographical rivalries are resurging. Military expenditures are skyrocketing along with an unabated arms race. The specter of nuclear conflict looms larger than ever, even before. On the one hand, our economy remains frail, still grappling with the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. On the other, nationalism and protectionism have re-emerged. Even before we have reaped the benefits that liberalism and globalization were meant to deliver. Even after 300 years of industrialization and modernization journey, it is deeply troubling that in our so-called civilized world of 21st century, wealth and prosperity are concentrated mostly at the hand of global north, and the poverty and destitution are heavily concentrated in the global south, particularly in the least developed countries. To overcome these travesties, we must demonstrate our leadership that promotes meaningful cooperation and collaboration. It is only through collective will and unified action that we can turn the tide and usher in an era of enduring peace and shared prosperity for all. In this context, the theme of this session, leaving no one behind, acting together for the advancement of peace, sustainable development, and human dignity for present and future generations, could not be more timely or relevant. We have reaffirmed our commitment through the Summit of the Future to build a safe, just, and sustainable world for both present and future generations. This pledge is embodied in the three pivotal documents we have adopted: Pact of the Future, Declaration on Future Generation, and the Global Digital Compact. We must demonstrate our determination to implement these documents for the well-being of present and future generations. Mr. President, allow me to underline that the principle of leaving no one behind has long been the cornerstone of Nepal's approach to development across all sectors. This philosophy is enshrined in our Constitution, which upholds the values of democracy by guaranteeing inclusivity, equality, justice, proportional representation, human rights, and social protection for the most vulnerable sections of society. I am determined to lead my country with my deep conviction to comprehensive democracy. For me, comprehensive democracy ensures equal rights, equal access to opportunities, social justice, protects the vulnerable communities, and provides the security and dignity for all individuals. Democracy goes far beyond the right of the people to choose their leaders. It is about leading the people towards prosperity and happiness so that they could feel highest level of dignity. At the international level, sovereign equality and mutual respect constitute the backdrop of comprehensive democracy. These principles are essential for building the frameworks of a just, inclusive, equitable, representative, and accountable global order. Mr. President, as a nation emerging from conflict, Nepal deeply understands the profound value of peace and political stability. Since the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Accord in 2006, Nepal has been firmly focused on completing the peace process at the earliest. Immediately after the formation of my government, Parliament passed a transitional justice bill to settle transitional justice issue once and for all. While we implement the law, we will uphold victims' rights, including truth and justice. We will also use reparations and reconciliation to heal the wounds and scars of conflict period. We appreciate support from international community, including the UN system, in this regard. The present government, formed by the collaboration of our two major political parties, is determined to secure stability while driving economic transformation for the inclusive and equitable prosperity to our people. At this juncture, stability and economic transformation are paramount to us than our periodic competition in elections. We have dedicated ourselves to realizing our national aspiration, prosperous Nepal, happy Nepali. Nepal will be graduating from its LDC status by 2026. We are diligently working towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, by 2030 and aspire as become a developed country by 2043, despite facing significant economic headwinds. However, our path to achieving the SDGs remains fraught with difficulties. We are confronted with a substantial financial gap of about $24 billion to attain the 2030 agenda. In this backdrop, Nepal hosted the IDA 21 replenishment meeting last June, underscoring the crucial need for continued and enhanced support from the International Development Association along with other development partners. In this pursuit, we strongly reiterate our call for enhanced, predictable, and sustained international support. Mr. President, climate change has emerged as the gravest threat to our planet, people, and prosperity. My own country, Nepal, is particularly hard hit. We stand as one of the most vulnerable nations to climate change and are ranked as the 20th most disaster-prone country in the world. Of utmost concern is the alarming rate at which the pristine Himalayas, often referred to as the third pole, are losing their vast snow reserves. This loss threatens water availability for billions of people living downstream, extending far beyond the borders of my country. Nepal has usually been contributing to the health of our planet through its forests, mountains, and rivers. Yet, despite these efforts, we continue to bear the brunt of climate change. In this context, we call for climate justice. Our mountains play a crucial role in regulating the climate and ecosystem of oceans with their snow-fed rivers flowing down to the oceans. Nepal's Himalayas, as a natural climate stabilizer, help maintain a cooling system in a region situated in the hottest zone of the planet between the Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn. Given their significance, it is essential that the mountain agenda should receive the due attention in climate negotiations. Nepal is steadfast in its commitment to the Paris Agreement and aims to achieve net zero target by 2045, 5 years earlier than global target. As climate change is a global challenge, it demands global action and collaborative efforts to address its widespread and cascading impacts. Adequate climate financing, including loss and damage fund, is crucial to support climate resilient measures and infrastructure for adaptation in developing countries, not least in LDCs. Mr. President, Nepal's land is blessed with the wisdom of enlightened great sages from both the Hindu and Buddhist faith, particularly the teachings of Gautam Buddha. This profound legacy has shaped our worldview to seek global harmony, peace, and security. The values of love, harmony, tolerance, and empathy, as espoused by Gautam Buddha, hold even greater relevance today than they did over 2,500 years ago. But to our deep dismay, the world is increasingly distressed by division, suspicion, hatred, and enmity. Nepal firmly believes that dialogue and diplomacy are the sole means to resolve conflicts, including in Ukraine and Middle East. It is through love and compassion that hostility and hatred can be overcome, paving the way for lasting peace. On the issue of Israel-Palestine conflict, we continue to support a two-state solution where Israel and Palestine coexist peacefully and securely within internationally recognized borders, in line with relevant United Nations resolutions. We must address the worsening humanitarian crisis in regions such as Libya, Syria, Sudan, South Sudan, Yemen, and elsewhere. It is vital to uphold the principles of sovereign equality, non-interference as enshrined in the UN Charter, to ensure peace and stability, Consequently, we strongly oppose any form of unilateral intervention or sanctions. Mr. President, disarmament and non-proliferation issues must be prioritized. Nepal strongly advocates for the general and complete disarmament of all weapons of mass destruction. As the host country to the UN Regional Center for Peace and Disarmament in Asia and the Pacific, Nepal firmly believes that regional efforts, including the Kathmandu process, serve to strengthen the global disarmament regime. Technology presents a double-edged sword, especially for the least developed countries. If we harness it, we can make remarkable progress. If we fail, it will leave us further behind. We call for technology transfer to enable us to catch up. Mr. President, Nepal has always adhered to a peaceful, independent, balanced, and non-aligned foreign policy based on the principles of Panchashil, the UN Charter, international law, and norms of world peace. We conduct our foreign policy with profound belief in amity with all, enmity with none. Nepal remains committed to further strengthening its close, cordial, and constructive relations with its immediate neighbors and beyond, rooted in the principles of mutual respect, sovereign equality, territorial integrity, non-interference in each other's internal affairs, and peaceful coexistence. As the largest contributor of troops and police to UN peace operations, Nepal stands ready to further enhance its contribution to global peace and security. Nepal believes it is our rightful call for having commensurate representation in the leadership positions both at the UN headquarters and in the field, reflecting our significant contribution. Mr. President, Nepal firmly advocates for the reform of the UN system to make it more effective, democratic, transparent, and accountable. We firmly believe that stronger multilateralism with the United Nations at its core is the only path forward to tackle the numerous global crises we face. We echo a call for substantial reform of the global financial system as aptly described it by Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres as morally bankrupt. The voice and representation of countries in special situations, including the LDCs, landlocked developing countries, LLDCs, and small island developing states must be ensured. Mr. President, Nepal firmly upholds the belief that all human rights are universal, unalienable, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. It is with this conviction that we have become a party to 24 international human rights related conventions and protocols, including 7 of the 9 core instruments. We are fully committed to promoting gender equality and ensuring equal rights for women. Nepal is making necessary legal arrangements for the full realization of all human rights for women and girls, including their sexual and reproductive health rights. Protection of the rights of migrant workers, including their safety, security, dignity, and well-being, has always remained our priority. We strongly advocate so far orderly and regularly migration to ensure that the benefits of migration are shared by all. Finally, Mr. President, the world we inhabit the world we inhabit is far from being perfect. Yet, it is not all doom and gloom. We firmly believe that humankind is still capable enough to march ahead without compromising the prosperity and happiness of future generations. None of the global challenges we are facing today have been imposed by alliance. These are our own makings, our own creations. Therefore, it is self-evident that by fostering global understanding, trust, and cooperation, we can overcome these problems and challenges. A just, inclusive, and equitable world order, as well as sustained prosperity and attainable when we collaborate effectively. Let me resonate the wisdom of our ancient text, the Maha Upanishad, from around the 6th century BC, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, meaning the whole world is one family. We not only hold this philosophy dearly, but we also act it on our everyday life. With this constant conviction, Nepal is committed to playing its role to secure our shared aspiration of enduring peace, progress, and prosperity while leaving no one behind. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of Nepal. I now give the floor to His Excellency Winston Peters, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Foreign Affairs, and Minister for Raising of New Zealand.
Mr. President, nearly 80 years ago, nations exhausted from the cataclysmic World War came together in San Francisco to create the United Nations Charter. Forged in the immediate aftermath of that war, then New Zealand Prime Minister Peter Fraser held the greatest hopes for the Charter's success, which he believed would be predicated on, quotes, the sincerity and moral determination of its members. But the beginning is a delicate time, and Fraser was a realist. He understood the Charter was imperfect. From the earliest debates in San Francisco, New Zealand fought against the veto rights bestowed upon the great powers. Fraser warned that, and I quote him, "The veto which can be exercised by one of the great powers, both in regard to itself and other nations, is unfair and indefensible, and may, if retained and exercised, be destructive not only of the main purposes of the international organization, but of the institution itself." Fraser knew that the United Nations Charter could only be secured with the great powers' agreement. And though he considered the Charter imperfect, he thought those imperfections could be overcome if the spirit of San Francisco is carried into the operation of the Charter. The spirit of San Francisco incorporated the hope that the great powers behave prudently, for as Winston Churchill said, the price of greatness is responsibility. But today, the spirit that created the United Nations Charter is sagging under the weight of its own potted history. Power waxes and wanes, so yesterday's great powers, today's permanent members of the Security Council, are challenged by periods of competition, or worse, abuse of the veto. This has serious implications for all members and the conduct of our foreign affairs. While some permanent members exercise restraint in their use of the veto, others consistently and frequently abuse this power. When Russia, a permanent member of the Security Council, illegally invaded its neighbour, it did not just violate Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter, it acted in utter contempt of the Charter. Russia then vetoed a draft Security Council resolution condemning its actions and calling for the immediate withdrawal of its forces from Ukraine. Not only does Russia lack the sincerity and moral determination required to make the United Nations work, but its delinquency should be a clarion call for long overdue Security Council reform. As Prime Minister Fraser said back in 1946, when referring to the veto's risks, quotes, "It is very bad if one nation can hold up the advancement of mankind," unquote. The world of 2024 looks very unlike the one of 1945. And so our collective institutions need to evolve and reflect contemporary realities. We need a United Nations Security Council that looks more like today's world. And we need veto reform. Tensions and imbalances between the desire for a rules-based international order that protects small states against aggression and the unjustified exercise of power by certain great powers have only grown these past 8 decades. Yet small states matter now as much as they did then. New Zealand holds the foundational belief that all states are equal and that our voices matter as much as the most powerful states represented here. It is the quality of our arguments and the principles of justice that inform them, not the size of our militaries, that should hold sway here. We smaller nations face many of the same challenges and share the same concerns. As my colleague from Singapore, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, put it at this year's East Asia Summit Foreign Ministers meeting in Laos, the problem for us is that every small state that wants territorial integrity to be respected, that wants its political independence to be guarded, that depends on the UN Charter to plan long-term, must view an invasion of a smaller neighbour by a larger neighbour as full frontal point of anxiety. We agree. We small states need today's superpowers to talk more, seek better understanding between themselves, and develop ways of compromising more, rather than a zero-sum game affecting better relations between today's great powers only enhances global stability, and that is what we, smaller nations, seek. The regional and global challenges we face are stark, the worst the world has faced since World War II. The challenges are complex and daunting. Across the globe, armed conflict is once more on the rise. Hard-fought development gains are being reversed. Human rights challenges and eroded, and geostrategic tensions are threatening global security and stability. Growing distrust and division is making international cooperation more difficult, placing the United Nations under strain and hindering the organisation's ability to find effective solutions. The world is facing a myriad of regional and global crises. We see multiple intersecting and mutually reinforcing crises of conflict, climate change, and increasingly a crisis of trust in our institutions. So the challenges we face in the General Assembly are stark, indeed the worst in several generations. They also reinforce the truism that the global geostrategic and security challenges faced in one era do not remain static. The world has changed, and so must we. Indeed, each generation of decision makers confronts new challenges as economics, demographics, technologies and societies evolve, as do the power calculations that accompany disruptive change. Old truths give way to new ones. The trick now, as it was then, is to have one's eyes wide open upon and about the fundamental shifts that are taking place and be nimble enough to adapt to them. The need to adapt to changing historical context is also important and incumbent on the United Nations and its organizations. The rise of many-lateral agreements is one sign of countries increasingly working together outside of the United Nations. Another is the cirrhosis around necessary veto reform. In the 10 months since returning for a third time as New Zealand's Foreign Minister, we have spoken widely with colleagues right across the globe. Summing up these discussions in a recent speech in Tokyo, we said that never has it been more apparent just how much diplomacy and the tools of statecraft matter in our troubled world. And since war and instability is everyone's calamity, diplomacy is the business of us all. We observed that at this moment in time, the ability to talk with rather than at each other has never been more needed. Those who share our values and those who do not gain from the understanding each other's position. And when we cannot agree, from understanding comes opportunity, and from diplomacy comes compromise, the building block of better relations between nations. We need more diplomacy, more engagement, and more compromise. As Churchill also said in his later years, quotes, meeting jaw to jaw is better than war, unquotes. Never has it been more apparent just how much political leadership is required to respond to the international challenges we face. Leadership is needed to restore trust in our domestic and international institutions, forge unity, and fill the gaps when the international community, through the United Nations, proves unable to. So, what does that leadership look like? It is leadership that can discern future opportunity while understanding but not being trapped by historical constraints. It is leadership that is underpinned by a leader's strength of character, their courage, their purpose, and a commitment to educate, not dominate their citizens. Given he will turn 100 years in the next few days, we recall with admiration such leadership exhibited by then President Jimmy Carter in 1978, in concert with Egypt's President Anwar Sadat and Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. They talked for 11 straight days at Camp David, from which emerged the Middle East peace accords between Egypt and Israel. That peace has endured, and New Zealand is proud as a foundational member of the multinational force and observers to have supported that peace since 1982. The accord reveals what is possible when leaders exhibit sincerity and moral determination, imbued by the spirit of San Francisco. We need more of this type of leadership and responsibility. Contrast that leadership with the catastrophic and ruinous path that has been followed in Gaza. This misery was caused by both Hamas' monstrous terrorist attack last year and now the overwhelming nature of Israel's response. We are most concerned about the generational consequences of this level of suffering and violence, with no end in sight, and which sees us on the precipice of an even wider conflict? Where is the sincerity and moral determination of today's leaders at the vortex of this unacceptable violence? New Zealand has sacrificed many of its young men to wars in faraway lands. Fully 10% of the total population of New Zealand fought in the Great War, and we lost a fifth of them. So every year on the 25th of April, we commemorate their loss at Gallipoli, the site of terrible carnage. This year, in a dawn address, we recalled that despite the horror of that war, on the Gallipoli Peninsula, fraternal bonds were forged between warring nations. Countries who were once enemies became friends. New Zealand never wants to experience the catastrophe of another world war. We must never be at another San Francisco conference picking up the pieces after another descent into global annihilation and human suffering. So we must do more, demand more, and deliver more. We must reject and resist those who seek to conquer and control. We must always seek the path of peace, because the lasting victories of humanity are those of peace, not war. Finally, despite our frustration at the lack of political will required to adapt this organisation to fully meet the challenges of today, New Zealand's support for the United Nations remains unwavering. That commitment is unchanged from when Prime Minister Fraser expressed his great hopes for the Charter 8 decades ago. We believe effective multilateral diplomacy means taking responsibility for our obligations as member states. So to that end, we announced today New Zealand's intention as a voice for smaller states to campaign for a seat on the Security Council for the 2039-40 term. That intention is supported by our enduring hope that the spirit of San Francisco can be reclaimed through the sincerity and moral determination of our diplomatic efforts, and that we can all do better, and that it reinforces our enduring support for the United Nations and the cause of peace. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister for Racing of New Zealand. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mbaye Mohammed, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, responsible for the Arab world, diaspora, the Francophonie, and African integration of the Comoros.
Excellencies, Mr. President of the General Assembly, Majesty, Highness, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum.
J'ai l'honneur de vous transmettre
It is my honor to convey
les chaleureuses salutations de
warm
Son Excellence Monsieur Azali Assoumani,
Mr. Azali
Président de l'Union des Comores,
President of the Union of the Comoros,
ainsi que ce vœu de plein
as well
succès et
as his wishes
réussite
for every
dans la conduite de
success
ces
in
travaux
the
d'importance
conduct of
planétaire.
this work which is of global
Permettez-moi tout
significance.
d'abord
First and
d'exprimer
foremost,
aux
I wish to
autorités
convey
américaines,
to the
au nom
authorities
de
of
la
the United
délégation
States, on
comorienne,
behalf of our delegation,
sincère remerciement
our
pour l'accueil
warm
chaleureux
gratitude for
que nous ont
the warm
réservé à New York,
welcome from
dans le
you
cadre de notre
in New
participation
York
during our participation during the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I wish to also convey my warm greetings to His Excellency Philemon Yang on his election and we welcome his election to the presidency of the 79th session of the General Assembly, and I wish to tell him that we as Africans are honored by his presidency. I wish to pay a warm tribute to His Excellency Mr. Dennis Francis for his wise, skillful stewardship and his commitment to peace and development during his presidency of the 79th session of the General Assembly, the proceedings of which were steered by him. And lastly, on behalf of my country, I wish to thank His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, for his commitment to peace and development.
Monsieur le Président, cette session de l'Assemblée générale de l'ONU s'ouvre encore une fois un moment particulièrement délicat de la vie de la communauté internationale. Depuis le 22 février 2022, la guerre en Ukraine ne cesse de ravager deux grands pays européens, mettant en danger l'équilibre du monde. Au nom de l'Union des Comoros, j'implore les dirigeants russes et ukrainiens, empruntant le chemin du dialogue et de la négociation, je les sollicite pour leur peuple, pour la marque qu'ils laisseront dans l'histoire, mais aussi parce que le cessez-le-feu d'abord, la paix ensuite, sont les conditions indispensables d'un apaisement économique et social et alimentaire pour le monde entier, et en particulier pour l'Afrique, qui souffre de tant de ce conflit.
Development for the entire world, in particular in Africa, which has been plagued by conflict. I now turn to Palestine. In light of the realities endured on a day-to-day basis, there is no doubt that we are not seeing legitimate defense. This war has been punctuated by disproportionate use of force, largely targeting innocent people. This is the purest form of genocide perpetrated by the Israeli forces in Gaza, which we condemn, and there's an urgent need to bring this to an end. The horrors endured by the people of Palestine have been reflected in our daily reality as we see the deaths of more than 40,000 people, including women and innocent children, more than 100,000 injured people, forced displacements of thousands of people under inhumane conditions, as well as the systematic destruction of hospitals and residential buildings. Our country reaffirms our full solidarity and our steadfast support to the fraternal people of Palestine. We beseech the international community to act for an immediate cessation of hostilities and for a rapid resumption of the delivery of humanitarian assistance.
À une solution juste et durable, fondée sur le droit international, les résolutions pertinentes des Nations Unies. Nous exhortons en particulier la communauté internationale à œuvrer rapidement en vue de parvenir à une solution à deux États. Un État palestinien souverain avec Jérusalem-Est comme capitale et vivant côte à côte en parfaite sécurité avec Israël. Nous saluons l'admission de l'État de Palestine en tant que membre de plein droit de l'ONU à sa participation aux travaux de l'ONU à compte de la présente session. Je rappelle aussi que la situation est également très grave en Cisjordanie et comme le souligne le cardinal Pizzaballa, patriarche latin de Jérusalem, ce qui se passe est un exemple palpable et concret dans la façon dont la haine, le ressentiment le mépris ont conduit à des formes de violence de plus en plus extrêmes et de plus en plus difficiles à contenir. La situation au Soudan retient également toute notre attention. Nous appelons les deux parties au conflit à la retenue pour épargner les populations des affres de cette guerre qui, pour des frères, n'a que trop duré. S'agissant du Sahara occidental, l'Union des Comores estime que le plan d'autonomie de ces territoires au sein du royaume charifien présenté de 2007 par les autorités marocaines constitue le moyen le plus sûr de parvenir à un règlement durable des conflits anachroniques dont la perpétuation serait contraire aux intérêts même des populations concernées au développement économique de toute la région. Mon pays appelle donc les parties prenantes à y adhérer et enjoint la communauté internationale de leur apporter son soutien. Je voudrais d'autre part souligner que le droit international et l'ouverture au dialogue doivent prévaloir dans l'appréhension des problèmes et surtout politiques. Il en va de même concernant le respect de l'intégrité territoriale des États. Aussi s'agissant de la question de l'île comorienne de Mayotte, je voudrais rappeler que l'unité comorienne est une réalité fondée sur des données ethno-géographiques, linguistiques, religieuses et économiques, malgré le caractère insulaire du pays. À cela s'ajoute un attachement du pays au principe sacro-saint du droit international, des résolutions pertinentes des Nations Unies, lesquelles reconnaissent la souveraineté des Comores sur l'île de Mayotte. Ainsi, j'ai saisi l'occasion de ma présence sur cette tribune des Nations Unies, symbole du multilatéralisme par excellence, pour réaffirmer la constance du gouvernement comorien dans sa volonté de respecter le droit et son ouverture au dialogue pour ce différend qui oppose l'Union des Comores à la France afin de parvenir à une solution juste et durable capable de préserver les intérêts partagés entre nos deux pays amis. L'Union des Comores réitère son adhésion à la résolution adoptée par le sommet de l'avenir, tenu ce 22 septembre 2024, marge des travaux de cette Assemblée générale des Nations Unies. Nous plaidons pour une réelle collaboration internationale afin d'établir des lignes directrices permettant d'aboutir à des outils juridiques garantissant le développement et l'utilisation équitable d'une intelligence artificielle propice au développement de la croissance, de la productivité, de la connaissance partout dans le monde. Cette résolution ouvre, entre autres, des perspectives prometteuses dans la prise en compte des problèmes spécifiques des petits États insulaires en développement. Dans ce cadre, la conférence CID 4, qui s'est tenue en mai dernier à Antigua et Barbuda, a marqué elle aussi un nouveau progrès dans cette prise de conscience universelle. C'est aussi parce que nous appelons au strict respect de l'accord de Paris et à un soutien financier et technique conséquent que nous attendons avec beaucoup d'intérêt. La prochaine conférence sur le financement du développement revient en Espagne en 2025. Cette conférence constituera une opportunité pour les États du Sud de plaider pour les réformes des banques et institutions multilatérales de développement et d'obtenir en faveur de nos pays un cadre prévisionnel de ressources durables, accessibles, prévisibles. Pour assurer le succès de cet événement, je souhaite que les pays concernés au premier chef ne tardent pas à se réunir pour travailler ensemble à la formulation de leurs propositions. Monsieur le Président, la paix et la stabilité politique sont les deux piliers essentiels devant soutenir toute action de développement. Aussi, à la suite des élections du 14 janvier 2024, ayant reconduit son Excellence M. Azali Assoumani à la magistrature suprême du pays, celui-ci s'est attelé à poursuivre la noble mission d'accélérer l'émergence des Comores d'ici 2030. L'engagement du chef de l'État pour accélérer l'émergence du pays se traduit par la réalisation des projets phares contenus dans le plan Comores émergent et présenté lors de la conférence des partenaires au développement des Comores tenue à Paris en décembre 2019. Le plan Comores émergent dispose également des projets structurants dont le programme de développement de l'économie bleue, secteur préporteur qui constitue l'un des moteurs de la transformation économique et sociale. Conscient du rôle crucial de l'économie bleue et en tenant à relever la particularité des États insulaires, mon pays a organisé à Moroni, en juin 2023, sous la présidence comorienne de l'Union africaine, avec l'appui de certains partenaires, la conférence des ministres sur l'économie bleue et l'action climatique sous le thème des États insulaires à l'avant-garde. Celle-ci a vu la participation de tous les États insulaires et côtiers d'Afrique. La déclaration de Moroni, adoptée à l'issue de cette conférence, détermine entre autres les éléments de la feuille de route à exécuter en vue de la prise en compte de la particularité et de la vulnérabilité de ces États par la communauté internationale. La prochaine conférence sur les océans nous offrira l'occasion de présenter la déclaration de Moroni, dont les engagements convergent avec les objectifs mondiaux en matière de développement durable. Monsieur le Président, le gouvernement comorien accorde une attention particulière à la jeunesse. Plusieurs initiatives sont en cours pour développer l'entrepreneuriat de jeunes, assurer de meilleures opportunités d'emploi dans les divers secteurs et leur faire jouer un rôle de premier plan dans le développement socio-économique du pays. La promulgation de la loi Un jeune, un emploi traduit cette volonté qui l'anime. L'attachement du chef de l'État de l'Union des Comores à l'épanouissement de la jeunesse, mais aussi la confiance qu'il accorde à cette catégorie de la population pour impulser une dynamique nouvelle en tant que force motrice du pays, l'a conduit à nommer il y a quelques mois un gouvernement majoritairement formé de jeunes cadres. Il a ainsi pris le pari d'engager avec la jeunesse la transformation du pays pour le renouveau des Comores. Au-delà de ce domaine clé, le chef de l'État a également retenu le sport, la culture, l'art et le patrimoine dans son agenda quinquennal, marquant ainsi son intérêt pour ce volet social qui contribue à bien façonner et à bien renforcer notre identité nationale. Aussi, pour ce qui est du sport, au nom du président de l'Union des Comores et de son gouvernement, je rends un vibrant hommage à notre équipe nationale de Sélacan pour les performances qu'ils réalisent de plus en plus sur le continent à la grande fierté du peuple comorien. Monsieur le Président, les défis qui se posent au monde d'aujourd'hui sont multiples. C'est là une action conjuguée de nous tous pour y faire face. Chaque session qui a lieu, regroupant cette assemblée, est un espoir pour les peuples de voir se pointer des changements de tout ce qui fait leurs angoisses et leurs appréhensions. Au nom de valeurs nobles qui nous unissent, œuvrons pour transformer ces angoisses en apaisement, ces appréhensions en espoir et surtout en réalisation des aspirations de nos peuples respectifs. Thank you very much for your attention.
To the aspirations of our respective peoples. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, responsible for the Arab world, diaspora, the Francophonie, and African integration of the Comoros. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Dominique Hassler, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Education and Sport of Liechtenstein.
Mr. President, the UN is a special meeting place for all countries. This is what our head of state said in his very first speech at the UN General Assembly when Liechtenstein became a member 34 years ago. It is a singular forum where not only countries come together, but peoples. I was very young then, just about to enter high school, but I remember vividly the sense of significance that prevailed among us back in 1990. The wish to safeguard our sovereignty was a key incentive for us, a theme that resonates so strongly among many, many small states today. We have never seen membership as just an end in itself. The United Nations has been a key foreign policy platform for Liechtenstein. We have made a significant political investment, developed our own profile, been an independent voice, and put forward our own initiatives, most recently the veto initiative. For us, the people and the government of Liechtenstein, the main purpose of the United Nations remains peace and security, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, in the immortal words of the UN Charter. It saddens me to say that this purpose has lost none of its relevance today. The aggression against Ukraine, planned and perpetrated by those who wield power in the Russian Federation, has not only destroyed the European security architecture, it has undermined the international legal order as such. And it has created a real risk and genuine fear of future illegal war-making, not just in our part of the world. After enjoying long decades of peace, which is much more than the absence of war, our people have been able to live in prosperity and with full respect for human rights. As a small state, without armed forces, the guarantor of our sovereignty is respect for international law, which the UN embodies like no other organization. Our unequivocal stance in support of Ukraine is thereof a commitment to the international order and ultimately to our own security. More than 2 years of brutal war of aggression have brought immeasurable human suffering, economic devastation of immense proportions, and environmental damage for decades to come. Many of these outcomes are, sadly, irreversible. But together, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to bring about a just peace. And indeed, there will be no peace without justice. Peace must therefore be based on the terms we have already set together in this hall. And it must ensure individual criminal accountability for those who have, willfully and unprovoked, initiated this war of aggression. This alone will ensure that there is a prospect for sustainable peace for Ukraine, but also for the region as a whole. This alone will give small states everywhere the confidence and belief that their sovereignty and territorial integrity will be protected and safeguarded here at the United Nations, while demonstrating that we are committed and able to fulfill the purpose that has brought us together in this organization. Mr. President, much of what we have done in recent years here in New York was driven by the belief that we must safeguard the role of the United Nations in maintaining peace and security. We support a strong Security Council, but see little indication that it will be able to come together in the way the current challenges require. Rather than criticizing and lamenting what is a political reality, we have to think about alternative avenues, avenues that do indeed exist. This assembly is the key platform in this respect. It has taken the lead on Ukraine, and it has adopted important decisions on the Gaza war. And under the terms of the veto initiative, which has resonated so strongly in this hall, it is given the option to act whenever the Council is paralyzed by a veto. The Pact of the Future has given us the necessary basis to continue what we have begun and to chart a new path for peace and security. Only in working together we will be able to deliver on this promise. Mr. President, for almost a year now, the situation in the Middle East has absorbed much of our attention. We have witnessed with horror the terrorist attack on the civilian population of Israel on the 7th of October. And we are shocked and appalled by the suffering of the civilian population of Gaza, the many thousands of innocent victims, a very large number of children among them, which is simply unacceptable. The protection of civilians is a key priority on the agenda of the United Nations. However, it seems to be a mere afterthought for those making the decisions on both sides of the conflict, whose actions cause human suffering and threaten stability in the region. We are deeply concerned about the next level of escalation between Israel and Hezbollah and join the call for a 21-day ceasefire in order to prevent a further conflagration in the region. Liechtenstein is a strong supporter of the two-state solution. As such, we prioritize the protection of all civilians affected in our response and in our decision-making. We have contributed humanitarian assistance to the civilian population. We have called for the full respect for international humanitarian law by all, and with that I call, again, for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. We support the efforts by the International Criminal Court to investigate according to its mandate. The two-state solution, which enjoys an overwhelming support among all of us in this hall, was decided by this very assembly many decades ago. There is no other conflict where the United Nations has a clearer and longer-lasting responsibility. The end of the war in Gaza will only be one step in the long and difficult path to a two-state solution that allows Israel and Palestine to live together in peace and security in line with the right of self-determination of all peoples. Knowing that this will take time, it is even more important that all actors stop escalating the conflict further and that the human suffering ends today. The UN and each single member state need to live up to the goal we have set ourselves many years ago and bring this conflict to an end. Mr. President, the sovereign equality of all countries and respect for international law are key for all UN members to thrive, but for smaller ones, even more so. It is no surprise then that in this building, my country is known in particular for our clear and consistent stance in support of the rule of law. We are proud of the work we have done on international law. And it is a commitment we are determined to continue, especially as there is no doubt that international law is under attack from more sides and in more ways than ever before. Today, I call on you. I call on all of us to face this challenge as an opportunity, to come together and unite in a way that brings together all who need international law upheld for their survival and prosperity. All of whose best and sometimes only defense is that the rules governing the contact between states since 1945 are actually enforced. All of us who are willing to stand up for each other, driven by both solidarity and enlightened self-interest. Today, it is a moment for us to realize that we must not take the existence of the United Nations for granted, that this organization's foundation is rooted in international law, but also that it is us in this room that have the power and means necessary if we work together. Doom and gloom are not the hallmark of leadership. We are encouraged by the fact that small states in particular are increasingly standing up for the rule of law and against the rule of might. We are gratified to see that the International Court of Justice and its decisions is looked at for guidance in our decision-making in challenges ranging from the two-state solution to the applicability of the Genocide Convention to climate change. This is a good and, more importantly, a necessary time to be the change that we want to see in the world. Mr. President, we politicians have the privilege, the agency, and the voice that we have to use. This, in my view, comes also with the obligation to speak up for those who do not have a voice. In a shockingly literal sense, the women of Afghanistan do not have a voice at all anymore. I therefore want to speak up for them from this podium. The denial of even their most basic human rights must be completely unacceptable for this organization and its representatives. We will continue to demand that the United Nations lives up to its special obligation and supports action to fight this extreme case of gender persecution. We must also speak up against the brutal oppression of women in Iran. Women across the world have been speaking up as agents of change for many years. We must ensure those voices are amplified at the highest level. As experience has shown, we will get better results for everyone if we entrust leadership positions much more often to women. As many others, I believe that it is a credibility challenge for the United Nations that a woman has yet to lead this organization. After decades of talking about gender equality, the United Nations should shine as an example. Mr. President, we simply need to do what we have promised. On peace, the central mission of this organization, on gender equality, on human rights, on deterring aggression, and on ensuring accountability. The collective action so urgently needed today requires strong leadership, which is often lacking today. Leadership, whether by woman or man, comes with responsibility, accountability, and with the ability and willingness to listen to and work in the interest of those we represent. All of us that have had the privilege to speak from this podium have an obligation to present and future generations to deliver on the great hopes placed in our United Nations. Only then is this organization the singular place that serves the people of the world in their desire for world peace. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Education and Sport of Liechtenstein. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Maria Malmer Stenergard, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden.
Mr. President, Excellencies, we are gathered in this assembly while the world and this organization are facing major and existential challenges. We are gathered while we are witnessing an unprecedented number of armed conflicts, from Ukraine to Sudan, the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, and Gaza. We are gathered while we are failing at our collective goal of maintaining international peace and security, of saving future generations from the horrors of war and from the disastrous consequences of underdevelopment and climate change. Mr. President, the UN Charter, the sovereign equality of all states, the peaceful settlement of disputes, the prohibition of the threat or use of force against any state is being challenged. We must stand by the Charter. Sweden's strong defense of international law, including the UN Charter, is based on the understanding that both our own security and that of other countries depends on it. Ensuring respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of all states, both large and small, is in our common interest. At its core lies the need for a global system that is open, predictable, and applies equally to all. In too many places around the world, including in Sweden's immediate neighborhood, we are witnessing the consequences of violations of the rules and principles we have all agreed to. Since the start of Russia's aggression against Ukraine in 2014, and with a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russia has brutally invaded the territory of another UN member state. This Assembly has strongly and repeatedly condemned Russia's aggression against Ukraine as a blatant violation of international law, including the UN Charter. If a member of the Security Council is allowed to reap the fruits of aggression, the harmful impact will not stop with Ukraine. Russia's leadership will continue its attempts to impose its rule on neighboring countries. The territorial integrity and sovereignty of all states must serve as a basis for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine. This was confirmed at the Peace Summit in Switzerland in June, which gathered some 100 delegations from all continents. Ukraine has made clear from the start that it wants a peaceful settlement based on the UN Charter. As President Zelensky rightfully said in his speech before this Assembly yesterday, there can be no just peace without Ukraine. Sweden's steadfast support for Ukraine's efforts to restore its sovereignty and territorial integrity will continue for as long as it takes. As a direct response to Russia's full-scale invasion, Sweden and Finland chose to join NATO. For Sweden's part, this represents a truly historic change, ending 200 years of military non-alignment. This was our decision to make because it is the right of each state to choose its own security policy path. Sweden's NATO membership gives us a new, crucial platform to defend the fundamental values of our foreign and security policy. We will apply the same principled approach in NATO as we do in the UN, the EU, the OSCE, and the Council of Europe. In other words, we will continue to defend international law, democracy, individual freedoms, human rights, and gender equality. Mr. President, Sweden has always defended the universal principles of sovereignty and the right to self-determination. In fact, Sweden has consistently supported countries struggling for liberty, independence, and democracy, not least in Africa. And we continue to be an engaged partner of African countries. To take just one example, I am deeply concerned about the situation in Sudan. More than 10 million people have been displaced, which roughly corresponds to the entire population of my own country. Safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access, an immediate ceasefire, and negotiations ensuring a return to civilian rule are urgently required. Therefore, Sudan is among the countries receiving the most humanitarian support from Sweden this year. Sweden remains a key partner and donor of UN humanitarian assistance, as well as of peacekeeping and peace-building efforts. Similarly, Sweden supports the ongoing peace efforts by the United Nations in Yemen, where we will continue to work with our partners for a principled and inclusive humanitarian response. The people of Yemen are looking to the international community for hope, for a way out of humanitarian despair. We must answer that call. Mr. President, we are also faced with the threat of a regional war, the consequences of which no one can predict. My country's long-standing commitment to peace efforts in the Middle East dates back to 1948 and the efforts of UN mediator Folke Bernadotte. Today, Sweden is one of the largest core donors to UN agencies and other organizations working to mitigate the immense suffering of the civilian population of Gaza. At the same time, Sweden stands up for Israel's right to defend itself in accordance with international law, and we demand that the hostages be released. Israel is being threatened by Iran and its allies simultaneously on several fronts. Hezbollah's repeated attacks since October 8th have led to a dangerous military escalation. Sweden fully supports the efforts by the United States, France, and others to reach a diplomatic solution. A ceasefire would provide space for reaching a diplomatic settlement consistent with UN Security Council Resolution 1701, as well as the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2735 on a ceasefire in Gaza. In the longer term, Sweden, like the EU and the United States, believe in the idea of a two-state solution in which Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace, freedom, and democracy. Mr. President, in order to address global challenges, we need to ensure that our aid helps to mobilize additional resources, not least private capital. Development assistance alone is not enough to build long-term wealth and welfare. It must go hand in hand with democracy, the rule of law, market development, trade, investments, and technology transfer. We see that clearly in the countries now leaving poverty behind. We must also redouble our efforts to achieve the 2030 Agenda. Sweden is one of the world's most generous donors of development assistance. Through our development assistance, we are accelerating the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. To achieve this, strong national ownership in partner countries and a broader approach to development cooperation among donors is needed. We must also step up the fight against corruption so that economic growth benefits the whole of society, not just a few. Mr. President, I can only note that women have been underrepresented as speakers this week at the general debate. Women make up 50% of the world's population, yet only 10% of speakers this week are women. There is, one could say, a lot of room for improvement in this regard. And I agree with the Secretary General that global opposition to gender equality is on the rise. That is why gender equality is a core value in Sweden's foreign policy. So let me say this, countries that stand up for women's and girls' rights are not only champions of freedom and human rights, they also benefit from broad labor market participation and economic growth. Respect for human rights, providing sexual and reproductive health and rights services, and empowering young women and girls are tangible contributions to advancing gender equality. This is what I want for the future of my daughter, Kaisa, and for the daughters of others too. Simply put, our free society must stand up against those who wish to exploit our freedom to restrict the freedom of others. Everyone must be able to live safely and freely, regardless of religious beliefs or personal convictions, regardless of skin color, and regardless of whom they love. To my government, this is of such importance that we have begun work on an action plan for equal rights and opportunities for LGBTQI people. Mr. President, the green and digital transition offers vast opportunities in terms of new jobs, increased growth, and improved livelihoods. Sweden aims to become climate neutral by 2045 at the latest. As early movers, we want to show that it's possible to reduce emissions while maintaining economic growth. At the same time, global ambitions on climate action and climate financing must be raised. Here as well, we are increasing our support even further and enhancing its effect, advancing innovative financial models to mobilize more private capital. Mr. President, the many crises in our world today have shed a harsh light on the need for reforms of our multilateral system. We need global governance structures that can withstand the challenges of our time and that are resilient against malevolent attempts to undermine the UN Charter. Action, implementation and follow-up must be our approach as we look forward and take stock of the Summit of the Future and the pact adopted there. The UN Security Council, the body entrusted with the ultimate responsibility to maintain international peace and security, must be effective, transparent and accountable. Sweden supports a balanced expansion of the Security Council to better reflect current global political and economical realities. This can be achieved by such means as adding new permanent and non-permanent seats, including for African countries. Sweden also supports the ongoing reform processes in multilateral development banks to increase the effectiveness and scale of financing to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and implement the Paris Agreement. Another area where strengthened global governance is essential is outer space. Modern societies are becoming more and more dependent on space services, and the space environment is becoming increasingly congested and contested. Sweden is strongly committed to preventing an arms race in outer space and safeguarding the use of space for peaceful purposes. This includes all states' full compliance with existing international law, including the Outer Space